pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight downside, FP off. FP off.
Yikes.
You bet.
Okay. We don't need any more of these.
And hello and welcome to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and the Kennedy Space Center, where we are actually standing, right, Thomas?
Yes, sir.
Yes, welcome to our live coverage of the launch of NROL-44 on the Delta IV Heavy rocket from Slick 37B. At the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, you are looking live at the Delta IV and its hydrogen flare stack, a happy venting rocket. And right now, all is on track for a launch in 59 minutes from now at 2:04 a.m. Eastern, 6:04 UTC. And Thomas, it promises to be a pretty good launch, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
The weather out in Cape Canaveral looks gorgeous, a fairly clear night, so we're hoping to get a great view of Delta liftoff today on its classified mission for the National Reconnaissance Office, the first flight of the Delta IV Heavy and the Delta IV family overall this year. Following a bunch of Atlas V launches from United Launch Alliances, Delta IV getting its 2020 debut tonight.
And just quickly, this is Michael. Thomas, could you please move away from Chris? You're getting echo on your microphone.
Copy,
I just
Michael.
muted it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. So, yes, a 2020 debut for Delta IV Heavy here at Cape Canaveral. For those of you joining us, welcome from wherever you are around the world. It's early morning here on the East Coast of the United States on the 29th of August, a Saturday in what might be shaping up to be a very, very busy launch schedule out of the Cape today, Saturday, and tomorrow on Sunday. But right now, the star of our show for today is the Delta IV Heavy. You can see some gaseous oxygen venting away there from some of the common booster cores that form the first stage of the heavy configuration of this rocket. You can also see the hydrogen flare stack off to the left-hand side as well. So as hydrogen is boiling off inside the three common booster cores that form the first part, or the first stage of the Delta IV, as well as the oxidizer for the Delta cryogenic second stage, the upper stage for today. As that hydrogen boils off, it is safely transported away from the rocket and down to the flare stack. But some of the hydrogen doesn't quite get over to that flare stack. Some of it actually collects in the air around the base of the Delta IV. And Thomas, this leads to a really, really, really killer scenario at liftoff, does it not?
Absolutely. So for those who may not have seen a Delta IV liftoff before, you're in for quite a show. Delta IV likes to lift off with some dramatic flare. Those hydrogen-powered engines burn off a lot of excess hydrogen in and around the rocket at liftoff. So much so that actually, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, I'm sure, but they will actually stagger the engine ignition of the three different boosters. They'll light one of the side boosters slightly before lighting the other two cores. And that's to mitigate the giant fireball that you will actually see at liftoff. It is completely planned and nominal. It is simply part of the hydrogen-powered engines igniting for the first time. But yeah, you will basically see a giant lick of flame engulf the rocket right at engine ignition, and then see the rocket emerge from that fireball off the pad and on its journey to orbit. And if you have not seen one before, you're in for quite a show.
And it is a fireball, like you said, Thomas. It is a huge whoosh going up the side of the rocket that the fireball that you will see is a tempered down version of the one that originally existed with the Heavy. Another quick thing to go over for tonight before we start taking your questions, as we are about 55 minutes away now from the opening of our launch window. One of the other things that you might see tonight is the Delta IV taking off on fire. It is not uncommon for the Delta IV Heavy, because of that huge surge of hydrogen igniting that comes at engine ignition. It is not unusual for some of the thermal protection system foam to actually be on fire when the vehicle lifts off. This is normal for the Delta IV and is not a cause for concern. And we did want to mention both of those things off the bat. We'll be mentioning them again as we go through our broadcast tonight, but they are huge visual differences for the Delta IV rocket, and they can be really overwhelming and concerning if you're used to the way other rockets operate. But this one, huge fireball, can take off on fire, and it's one of the things we absolutely love about this rocket. Also, the fact that it casts a shadow onto its mobile servicing tower there in the xenon lights. You can see one of the side cores there, very visible to the left-hand side of that big gray structure that's behind the rocket. Great views here. So for those of you joining us this early morning or wherever you are around the world, thank you so much. Please go ahead and send us your questions about this rocket, about United Launch Alliance, about the Delta IV Heavy, about the payload that's on board. What, Chris? You're going to tell us you can ask questions about the payload when it's classified? Why, yes, I am, because even though it's classified, we have a pretty good idea what it is, don't we, Thomas?
We do, and that is based on a couple of different things. We know the kind of capabilities, the kind of missions that require a heavy lift rocket, such as the Delta IV Heavy, and we know what kind of orbit it might be going into because it is launching from Cape Canaveral versus launching into a more polar orbit from Vandenberg in California or something like that. And based on a couple of those things and some things that have become declassified over the years or leaked, there are some hints as to what this satellite might be. It is believed that it falls under the Orion program. It also has a couple different names because, like these classified NRO programs, they have like 5 different names, but the most common one is the Orion satellite. This particular one will be the Orion 10 satellite, and it is a signals intelligence satellite. Big, giant antenna on board. By some accounts, it is actually described as the world's largest satellite. And these satellites are used to improve United States Department of Defense intelligence around the world. One of the many Department of Defense national security missions that the Delta IV Heavy has served over its lifetime.
So if you have any questions about the Delta IV, about ULA, about the payload that's on board today, about the insanely busy launch schedule that seems to be aligning here Saturday today and Sunday tomorrow, go ahead and throw those up in chat. It helps us if you do tag at NASA Spaceflight in that. It does help us see it a bit quicker. But go ahead and throw up your questions. And Thomas, I've got one more camera that I need to set up for a remote street shot from here. So if you want to take it away on the broadcast here with some questions or some talk, I mean, I know you've been itching to get back here for a long time this year. So yeah, if you want to take over real quick, I'll go finish setting up the camera and then I'll rejoin you.
Sounds good. You know, while we're out here, we're not just doing live streams, we're also following on Twitter, putting out updates that way, and we are also capturing lots of photography and video. We've got a couple remote cameras out at the nearby Launch Complex 34, which is famous for being the site of the Apollo 1 events. And we've got a couple, and that is right next to the Delta IV Heavy pad. We've got some remote cameras out there, so hoping for some spectacular imagery and video from there. And we also have some extra cameras here at the press viewing site, which is actually on Kennedy Space Center property, as Chris alluded to, right next to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. But we will be, of course, posting all of that on nasaspaceflight.com and our social media handles, so keep a lookout for that. But for now, I'm going to keep my attention on this live stream because we are going to be counting down here towards launch. And I'm actually going to be looking out for those questions. I will pull up our list and see what have we got so far. But yeah, if you have any questions about the rocket, the mission overall, or anything else going on this weekend, there are plenty of things to talk about. Actually, if we look around the Cape, you won't see it in this view, and I'm not going to pan the camera because we've got it focused on the beautiful Delta IV rocket, which is already mostly fueled, for the record. It's been fueling for a couple hours now. But over to our left, we can actually see 2 Falcon 9 pads, Pad 40 and Pad 39A, both of which are actually lit up right now by work lights because SpaceX teams are working towards the other 2 launches from Cape Canaveral this weekend, both planned for Sunday, one Sunday morning and one Sunday evening. And that all aligns around the fact that this launch tonight has to go correctly first. This is a national security payload. It gets priority on the range when compared to other missions, and both missions on Sunday are commercial missions, so they fall a little bit lower on the totem pole. If Delta 4 needs another night to launch, they will give that rocket priority. But assuming this rocket goes off well tonight, we're in store for a very busy weekend here on the Space Coast. There's also a couple other interesting things about, especially one of those missions. The two missions going on Sunday in the morning, there will be the next Starlink mission, 60 new Starlink satellites for SpaceX's Internet constellation. Will lift off around, I'm going to get it wrong. It's around 10 a.m., mid to late morning on Sunday. Was it? 10:12. Thank you, Chris. So that will lift off from pad 39A on the core 1060.2, the second flight of core 60. And that rocket will head northeast here from Cape Canaveral, land on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You. And that will be the latest Starlink mission. And then if that goes well, SpaceX will turn their attention just a couple miles south to pad 40, where they will launch a very interesting and very exciting mission. The satellite on board that will be the SAOCOM 1B satellite for the Argentinian space agency CONE. And that launch is actually going to a polar orbit. You may be asking, if it's going to a polar orbit, why is it launching from Cape Canaveral? And that is because for the first time in over 50 years, a rocket will lift off from Florida's Space Coast and launch southbound down the coast of Florida in order to make a slight dogleg once it clears the bottom of Florida. We don't want to overfly populated land areas while we are launching our rockets in case something were to go wrong. But it will launch around the end of Florida and go into a southbound polar orbit. And that is because SpaceX and the Eastern Range have been working towards enabling polar launches from Cape Canaveral in order to increase their polar launch cadence in combination with the Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, where most polar missions are launched. And as part of that mission, not only is it being the first polar launch from Cape Canaveral in over 50 years, it will feature a return to launch site landing, the first stage of Falcon 9 on that flight, which is also a reflown booster, I believe on its fourth flight. That booster will come back to land at Cape Canaveral, not a drone ship, turning to land at Landing Zone 1, also here on the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, just a couple miles south of its launch pad. So that will be a spectacular show. That liftoff is scheduled for around 7 p.m. Eastern time here, and that will arrange the landing just to be about 10 minutes prior to sunset. So that will be some spectacular visuals, not only of it flying due south versus most of the missions that fly eastward, but then coming back in that booster, making a return to launch site landing. So all of us here at the Space Coast are very excited for 3 very incredible missions, and we hope that you'll keep tuning in over the weekend. It's a very busy weekend. We've also got some SpaceX testing over down in Boca Chica coming up as soon as Sunday as well. So SpaceX could be very busy on Sunday. The Starship SN6 vehicle is expected to make its hop test no earlier than Sunday. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and you know it if it happens in Boca Chica, we're live for it. So we'll be bringing you live coverage of that in addition to all the launches from Cape Canaveral. There's also a big return to flight mission from the Rocket Lab down in New Zealand. The Electron rocket making its return to flight no earlier than Sunday night, right after the Falcon 9 SAOCOM 1B mission. So all great things to keep tabs of here. And we will be bringing you live coverage on all of our different platforms of those missions. So keep tuning in and keep up with all of the latest happenings in spaceflight.
Yep. Thomas, real quick, do
yeah.
you mind if I do some super chats?
Go for it. Let's do it.
Yep, so I'm Michael. I am currently producing this behind the scenes, and I will also be relaying questions to Chris and Thomas in the field, and also going through the super chats when they come in. Really quickly, if everyone in chat could let us know the status of the stream, is the audio acceptable and whatnot. We're trying something new for the first time today. We have both Christy and Thomas in the field with real-time audio communication, so that I can talk to both of them without an audio delay. So let us know if everything's good. It looks like it is a little tiny. Yeah, the audio is not going to be perfect. The disadvantage of this is that we can't use a really fancy mic, but it sounds like it's acceptable. So that's good to hear. In terms of the super chats, Jeff, thank you for the membership. Bent, Jack, don't change that tune. Thanks for the stream tonight. Love everything y'all are doing. Thank you, Bent. I think you're referring to our live stream intro. We are definitely going to keep that around. Flex, thanks for the coverage as always, NSF team. Yes, we appreciate the support. Moldy Space Industry is a big supporter of the stream. Coffee money for Chris and Thomas. They are going to deserve it, especially with the upcoming launches on Sunday as well. Corey, thank you. More coffee money. Dougal. Dougal's also a big supporter of the stream. Yeah, so we definitely appreciate the lots of viewers that are tuning in tonight. Ace is down $10. Ace is another big supporter. I'll add some more coffee and maybe some snacks to go with it. And then finally, Mac with a new membership. So thank you all for the support. We'll run through the super chats every now and then. And also, I am keeping track of your questions. So whenever Thomas and Chris want to go through some questions, just ask me and I will relay them down to you.
I'm good for questions. How about you, Thomas?
Absolutely, I would love to.
Cool. So first of all, Stephen asks, is that a methane flare?
Great question. No, so this is not a methane flare stack, but it functions very similarly to the methane flare stack that we've been used to seeing down at Boca Chica for Starship testing, because just like methane is a very flammable and combustible substance in its gaseous form, when it boils out of the tanks of the Starship, right? At first, we saw a methane flare stack there, and that's where they would shunt all of that methane to safely burn it off. The same is true for hydrogen and liquid hydrogen, which is what the Delta IV Heavy uses in its 3 common booster cores for the first stage, and its Delta Cryogenic second stage as the propellant. So as the liquid hydrogen boils off, it is safely funneled away from the rocket and out to that flare stack to be burned off. But as we talked a little earlier, and as we'll remind everyone as we go through this broadcast, the hydrogen makes it over to there. Some of it does collect near the base of the rocket. So you will see huge hydrogen burn-off igniters called the radial outward firing initiators, or ROFIs, ignite about 15 seconds prior to liftoff. And at 7 seconds prior to liftoff, when the ignition sequence of the 3 RS-68A engines on the base of all 3 common booster cores ignite, you will see a rather significant fireball of hydrogen that is igniting in the air, and sometimes that results in the Delta IV Heavy taking off on fire. But same basic principle between this flare stack that you're seeing here and the methane flare stack that we used to see out at Boca Chica.
Yep, and just a quick update. I am listening into the countdown net. We are not allowed to broadcast that on the stream, but if anything does happen that is of note, we will be relaying that down to you. So if anything important happens, I will immediately interrupt Chris G and Thomas so that you can all follow the launch with us in real time.
We appreciate that, and I believe the last status update we got was that they were actually working an issue on the second stage. Is that still going on?
Yes, that issue has now been cleared, I believe. I did hear a call recently about the anomaly team, but I did not catch what they said. If I see an update, I will pass that down. But as of the previous issues, if you were following on Twitter, the previous 2 issues is one with the second stage, and then one with the valve. Those 2 issues have been resolved.
That's good to hear.
And it's worth noting, too, that ULA is very talkative on their countdowns as opposed to SpaceX, right, which is the other major provider that we're used to listening to countdown nets for here at the Cape. So ULA is very talkative. So we do hear all of the little small things that crop up. ULA likes to talk about them, right? And even things like earlier today, right, the 2 issues that have been resolved turned out to really be issues, right? And they were very quickly resolved and satisfactorily. But it's not uncommon to hear, in fact, it's very common to hear ULA work through small little issues like this. So as we proceed through the final, what are we at right now? About 45 minutes to go?
We are at L minus 40 minutes, so that does not include the built-in hold. The L minus clock that you see on the top left of our screen, that is the time until launch. If you hear, sometimes ULA says T minus, that's referring to how soon could the rocket theoretically launch, but does not include the built-in hold such a team has. So the T minus and the L minus clock are sometimes out of sync, depending on if they're built-in holds. But the important thing to know is L minus is how much time until launch. So when it says 39 minutes on a screen, it's 39 minutes until launch.
Perfect. Take some of the guesswork out of it too.
I can offer a brief update here from Cape Canaveral. As we are standing here at the press site, we have spotted one of the 45th Space Wing support forces is now airborne at Cape Canaveral. That's another milestone ahead of the launch. The 45th Space Wing, the Air Force, has helicopters airborne to make sure that the airspace and waterways remain clear around the range, and we can report that those are now airborne. So proceeding nominally through the countdown.
All right. So question time. Let's get back to questions. Yeah.
Michael asks, didn't the shuttle have row-free ignition?
Yes, indeed it did. Sorry, we were doing that Spider-Man thing where we were pointing at each other for a minute. Yes, indeed, the shuttle had rofies as well. So those sparks that you would see fly out at T-minus 10 seconds underneath the 3 main engine nozzles there on the shuttle were radial outward firing initiators. They did the exact same thing that they do for the Delta, which is to burn off excess hydrogen that is collected around the base of the vehicle. But same basic principle, exactly.
I don't know what Chris was thinking. It was a shuttle question. It was him all day.
I was thinking that when I looked down at my phone, it had gone to sleep, and I couldn't find the unmute button fast enough to start answering. But we are good. Yeah.
A reminder in chat, if you want to add a question to our queue, make sure you tag at NASA Spaceflight. We're using a filter to make it easier for us to find the questions. Jessica asks, why are they launching at night? Is it because it's a classified payload?
I love these questions because my joke answer is always yes, because we don't want it to see it coming, which is totally the joke answer. No, the real answer is that it comes down to orbital mechanics. So this satellite is so what we know about this satellite, right? It's classified. All we really know is that it's called NROL-44, which stands for National Reconnaissance Office Launch 44. Now, it's not the 44th National Reconnaissance Office launch because the previous NRO launch was NROL-129 a month ago on 129 or 125, right, Thomas? 129 on the Minotaur 4 out of Wallops. But these are just their code names. But what we do know about it is that more than likely it's an Orion signals intelligence satellite that is performing a direct to geostationary orbit launch. So the Delta IV will not take this into a transfer orbit and have the satellite do the rest of it. Delta IV is actually going to take it all the way to geostationary orbit, circularize it at 35,786 kilometers roughly, and that's where it's going to go. So because of that, right, what you have to do in determining your launch time is you have to know exactly where it is in the geostationary belt the satellite is going to go, exactly how long it is going to take the Delta cryogenic second stage to coast all the way up to geostationary orbit for it to then reignite to circularize the spacecraft's orbit in geo. Once you know all of that, then you just simply work backwards in your timeline to the launch site, and that gives you your launch time. That also explains why the launch time moves forward and advances in time by about 4 minutes every single day. It was 2:16, then 2:12, then 2:08, now 2:04. For today is because just like when we're trying to launch to the International Space Station and you have Earth's rotation and the planes of particular orbits, this comes into play when you are doing direct geostationary insertion missions like this one is believed to be tonight. So it's really just a function of orbital mechanics, exactly where you're going, how long it's going to take you to go there, and when Earth is at the correct point in its daily rotation around its axis that permits you to launch to get to that site. At the given time, you usually have a range, what we call the window, which means they have 4 hours in which to launch today in order to make it to that particular point when they need to, and that gives you 2:04 a.m. But it's always fun to say it so they don't see it coming for night launches.
I can actually tag on a related note. So, as Chris mentioned, this mission is going directly to geostationary orbit. A very common method of getting satellites to that geostationary orbit where they will operate is just to place them in an orbit where the highest point of the orbit is at that altitude, but the lowest point of that orbit is still much closer to Earth. And then the satellite will use whatever thrusters or propulsion it has on board itself to make that final circularization maneuver where it accelerates at the top of its orbit to stay in a more circular geostationary orbit. Today, that will be done by the Delta IV upper stage versus the satellite itself. That is the big difference. And because of that, the launch will not actually be complete until that final circularization burn is done and the satellite is deployed into its orbit. Which means that, and we usually get no live coverage past payload fairing separation when it's this classified mission. Again, because they're not going to broadcast images of the satellite on their live launch coverage. So live coverage will be cut a bit short, like most classified missions. The final news we get that the launch was a complete success usually comes on social media and ULA's website or via their CEO Tori Bruno. And when that happens, that will mean that the entire launch profile has been completed, meaning the satellite has been deployed into geostationary orbit. Because of this, it may take a long while before that confirmation comes out because the ride to geostationary orbit is particularly long. So if it doesn't happen, as quickly as some of the other missions come out as a mission success declaration, that is to be expected. It's a long mission profile when you're going all the way to geostationary orbit.
Indeed.
I think we can keep relaying questions, Michael. Obviously, we'll interrupt if we have any updates, but for now, we're just looking at a pretty rocket on the pad, so.
And just a quick update. We just got an hour brief on the issue that I did not pick up exactly what it was. It was something to do with an air conditioning. They have waived that issue, so it is not something that's going to prevent a launch tonight.
Excellent. And that sort of goes to what we were saying earlier, that ULA likes to talk about all these issues, even insignificant ones that they can that they can waive, basically, and say we don't need it for liftoff and we don't need it for flight. But it's always cool to hear the teams talk through those particular. And then issues is the wrong word, like chits, like little tiny things that pop up here and there that aren't big problems or anything like that.
Yeah, basically, there are some systems that are more important than others when you're launching a rocket. Obviously, when you launch your rocket, going to space, you mean a million things to all go perfectly right. But there are also systems, especially ones that are on the ground systems, can sometimes, if something isn't operating properly, there's either another system that can take over for it, or it's a system to make things, perfectly conditioned. But if it doesn't operate as expected on launch day, they can look at how the system is reacting to that system being down. And if it's still within nominal ranges, they can continue to proceed. And like Chris said, so ULA will talk about all of these things on their launch net because they are very talkative on that countdown net. But just because they're talking about it doesn't mean it's an issue. And we've now had 3 issues all cleared during this countdown in relatively quick fashion, none of which are going to prevent a perfectly successful liftoff as we stand now. So plenty of background there on why you're hearing about issues per se, and maybe issues isn't really the correct word. It's nothing that will prevent a successful mission, which is why they are continuing with the countdown as we go here. We are still on track for the opening of the window, which is 2:04 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:04 UTC. And yeah, all looking on track here right now.
Yep, really quickly, a couple of super chats. PT3D, thank you for the $10. And Babinski, thank you, Justin. Justin's also a big fan of the stream and a longtime viewer. He says, here's something for Mary's air conditioning / beer / water fund. Yep, we really appreciate the support for Mary, and she will be live on Sunday for the Starship Hop, assuming that happens. So lots of Boca Chica coverage coming up as well on this crazy amount of activity we have this weekend in the world of space.
And this is where we're grateful for the large number of team members that we have to be able to cover all of these things and bring them all to you. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Currently have Julia's at the Cape too right now, right?
She is. She is here doing her photography duties. She's going to capture some beautiful images, I'm sure. She is here at Cape Canaveral to conduct still imagery. Here's. Okay, you said
She
her
just
name
like
and she appeared.
emerged from the dark as you said her name. Say hi, Julia.
Hi, everyone!
So yes, it is Thomas, myself, Chris Gebhardt, and Julia, all here for the Delta 4. This is the first of two that we're actually going to, no, this is the first, this is the only one we're all three going to be at together, because the Starlink one at Kennedy, you're going to be setting remotes at the pad, but then I'll be there for the live stream because Kennedy is still only one person per organization. But then SAOCOM, Thomas and I will both be here, and you were going to watch from someplace else for SAOCOM, correct?
I'm gonna go beach side, yes.
There we go.
I'm gonna go south.
South is good for SAOCOM, I hear.
I hear south is the way to go.
Yeah, right? And I mean, when you do the math too, with SAOCOM, that's going to be a gorgeous flyback and return to launch site landing, because landing should come roughly 22 minutes before sundown
That's gonna
here.
be
So it should be freaking beautiful and gorgeous.
I am looking forward to that one. It's been a while since I've gone beachside for one. A lot of ours have been on the northern pad, so
Yeah.
and Playa Linda, that's not really an option lately. So
No, oh my gosh, but it'll be fun. Sunday's going to be intriguingly fun if this all pans out.
is your car gonna drive you home when you're
Pretty much.
exhausted from all of this?
Pretty much, yes. The car will simply take me home.
Oh, good to hear.
But yes, so that is the team that we have here today for Delta. Julia, this is the first time you're going to get to photograph the Delta Heavy, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And where did we set remotes? Because this one was an odd one where there was actually a request from the payload customer that we not set remotes at the launch pad.
Right. So this is a pretty secretive little payload up there. There's something about it that the NROL decided they'd prefer to not have our cameras nearby. There could be accidental transmitting or receiving or something going on that could interfere with that payload. So we got a different option, and we are at a neighboring pad, a very special pad, which is Launch Complex 34. And that was really exciting to set up at, because we got to share some of the history with you as well. But it's also challenging.
Is still there from the Apollo era, yeah.
Right. So a few things happened for Apollo. We honor the crew of Apollo 1 who perished in a test. Yeah, it was actually a test, and that is actually also the home of Apollo 7, which was the very last crewed space flight that left from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
Mm-hmm.
So, boy, when Starliner comes back, we'll officially say we've brought that back to Cape.
Ooh, but could we? Because because 41's that weird pad that's...
We can, because if you look on a map, it makes a dog leg, and it is still Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
But it's the Kennedy Space Center property and a Cape Canaveral pad, at least by ULA.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be I don't know. I'm going to bring my map out and show you.
I'll bring Jim.
Out. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that the History Center calls that our pad.
Well, yes. I mean, and effectively, we do always refer to Pad 41, the Atlas pad, the Atlas launch pad, as Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. We never refer to it as Kennedy. It's just a nice little weird where the boundaries are drawn, but how they share space.
We're a happy family on
Yes,
Cape.
because I think technically, like, they closed, like, the roadblocks make 41 a Cape pad.
Correct.
But the actual linear delineation of this is physically where the line is, it is...
Oh, yeah, it's over that line.
It's over that line.
It's over that line.
But it's fun. It's fun how the pads operate here.
Yeah.
But so what are you most looking forward to, Julia? I mean, you've been here. You were here when Parker Solar launched, correct?
I was only here for the first attempt.
So you've never seen a Delta Heavy launch?
I have never seen a Delta Heavy launch from the Causeway, no.
For the record, neither have I. This is my first Delta 4 Heavy as well.
I have rookies with me today.
Excited little voices from down that way.
All I'll say is the fireball will be bigger than you expect.
Will it be loud too?
Oh, it'll be loud.
I like loud.
Yes. 2.12 million pounds of thrust is what the Delta 4 Heavy puts out at liftoff as it comes off the pad. but it has an insanely low thrust to weight ratio of only like 1.1 or 1.2. This thing lumbers off its launch pad.
So, as a photographer, I'm going to say thank you for being a lumberer, because with
Yes.
us at Launch Complex 34, which is 3,400 feet away from the pad,
Do your math,
to the
folks.
pedestal, and if sound travels 1,000 feet per second, I have 3.5 seconds before my trigger just might happen.
Well, it'll
And-
barely be off the pad in 3.5 seconds, so
Right?
you're good.
And my aperture is itty bitty bitty. So, if in case you haven't figured this out, I am going to try a streak shot, 30-second exposure with the launch mount in the foreground. So
Should be awesome if we get it.
I'm crossing my fingers.
Yeah. So cool, so cool. So that's a good thing of where we are right now, but I do see that we are 24 minutes away from our anticipated liftoff time. So, Michael, do we have any other questions?
I'm gonna say bye camera.
Okay.
I'll see you guys
Have
later.
fun. We'll get. All right. So we do spread out, even though we're a team. Like, we do spread out, and we knew Julia was here somewhere, but there are like 40 cars, and man, that was perfect. Like, Michael's just like, Julia's here, right? And we looked up, and here she comes out of the darkness. So awesome. But yes, since we are about 23 minutes away from liftoff now, let's return to our question queue or our super chatter membership queue to keep this going. Yeah.
Stand by. They are looking at an issue. It does not sound like they're going to be able to launch inside of the window. I'm waiting to hear more information.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
This is where Chris makes fun of me for being a rookie again, because those who are familiar with the Delta IV family of rockets, they don't launch super often, and when they do, it usually takes a try or two. Delta IV likes to be a little finicky on the pad. It always goes eventually, and it has a great launch record, but we were already here one night before. We didn't even get to the part where we went live because they never even started fueling the rocket. They had a ground system issue. But we are here. This is the second launch attempt. And so, like Michael just said, they are working on another issue. Sounds like there will be a potential delay to the launch time. We'll stay tuned to figure out what that issue is
I have an
and
update.
what the new launch time
Sorry,
is.
Thomas,
And Michael
I
has
have
an
an
update.
The launch team, this is a tweet from ULA. The launch team is evaluating temperature readings on the vehicle compartment. This could delay our target liftoff time. So they used the word could, they didn't say would. But this sounds like the issues they mentioned they were monitoring earlier and had waived with the temperatures, they are now more concerned about. So that is the current status.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And like you said, that could delay the time. We have mentioned before that there are other built-in holds during the countdown, and there are issues that don't necessarily require actually stopping the countdown at any point. So right now the countdown, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, the countdown is proceeding, and in the chance that they resolve this issue prior to entering the terminal count at T-4 minutes, we will be able to just launch right on time at 2:04 as previously scheduled. If they do not resolve this issue in time for the terminal count, they will have to stay at that T-4 and holding mark most likely, and continue to work around that issue. And then once they have it resolved, they can continue towards the end of the countdown.
Okay. And we will take another question. Chris with the super chat, thank you so much. They ask, why is the fairing today splitting in 3 ways rather than the normal 2 ways?
Yes. Well, it's a good question, and Thomas, I don't know if ULA has specifically given the answer to this, but usually when you have fairings that split into more than 2 halves, right? It's a function of lowering the mass to push them out of the way quickly when you have a large satellite inside your payload fairing, but I'm not sure if they've given the exact reason.
I might ask for our studio team to fact check this. I know that the fairing is longer than usual. It is the longest type of payload fairing that Delta IV flies with. There's a couple different fairing sizes they can adjust based on how big the payload is. Obviously, if you want a huge payload fairing, if the payload doesn't fill the whole available space because you're carrying all that extra weight of a larger payload fairing. So they only use the fairing size they need. I'm not sure. I know it is a 3-part fairing. I don't know if that means it separates into 3 parts at fairing separation, or if it's just 3 segments long as far as how tall the fairing itself is. So I might ask for a check on that.
I believe it's the first thing you said. It splits in 3 as they separate. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's correct. It's called a tri-sector fairing as opposed to the normal bisector fairing. I know because I just Googled that, not because I'm smart, but there you go.
Well, so as Chris alluded to, then I mean a big issue in designing these fairings is weight. So because it is such a long fairing, they have designed it to then separate into 3 pieces. That is almost certainly to reduce the force needed to eject those fairings from the upper stage as it flies. Obviously, the longer the fairing, the longer each piece of the fairing, or the longer. I'm sorry. The longer the fairing, the more each piece of the fairing will weigh, and thus you need more force to push it away from the rocket. So with a big fairing like this, the split into 3 parts is almost certainly to make sure that it falls away sufficient distance from the upper stage as it continues powered flight, because the
Yes.
fairing does separate right after the second stage separates from the center core of the rocket, and you want to keep the fairing away from that still firing rocket engine.
Yes.
Yes.
And an
And
important update, we're now
yeah.
T minus 4 minutes and holding. L minus 18 minutes and 30 seconds because that's the way the two different countdowns go. Again, L minus 18 minutes is how long until launch. T minus 4 minutes, which is where they are at right now, is how long they could theoretically launch in. But they have a 15-minute built-in hold right now so that the teams can go through the final checkouts, which includes, of course, continuing to look at the issue they're working right now. And then at the end of the hold, they will do a poll where all the teams report their status, and if everything is go, they will proceed with the countdown. If not, they have a several-hour launch window to take to work at. So if they have to extend a hold for an issue, that is not a problem that will prevent launch necessarily.
Which is, we have built-in holds for this exact reason, because they could finish their anomaly investigation and have it resolved and launch right on time, right? In which case, our built-in hold here will have saved us, right, from going at the beginning of the window, where if you have counts that don't have built-in holds, you would have to be stopping them and actually pushing into your window a little bit more. But one final thing I did want to say about the payload fairings, and Thomas, I know you can back me up on this. If you've ever played Kerbal Space Program, you know the importance of a fairing that splits 3 ways at separation for large, tall payloads in your fairing. Another way that game just it's not even a game; it's just an experience. But that can really help help everyone really get a good understanding of what's happening as these vehicles are launching and why they function the way they do. But
You want a challenge in Kerbal Space Program, fly a mission to geostationary orbit, and you'll understand A, why the mission takes several hours, and B, just how hard it is to get that exactly right. There's a lot of impressive engineering that goes into these missions.
oh yeah, especially considering some geostationary orbit insertion flights were done with solid propellant vehicles. That's fun. But yes, questions as we are in our built-in hold now at T-minus 4 minutes, Michael.
Here's a relevant question from John Miller. Can you explain the planned holds? Is this an instantaneous launch window?
No, this is not an instantaneous launch window. Tonight's launch window extends all the way to 6:25 a.m. local time, 10:25 UTC. That is the window that was announced by United Launch Alliance. The beginning of the window was actually 1:50 a.m. Eastern time. They have this big, nice launch window, and they said that the earliest possible actual liftoff time was 2:04 today. So there's some stuff going on behind the scenes that might be part of the classified mission, not disclosing the exact launch window. But we do know that they have a nice long set of a couple hours to successfully lift this mission off, so not instantaneous.
And based on yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Important update. They are going to extend the hold. So we are officially at T-minus 4 minutes and extending the hold. So I'm going to update our status on the stream to hold, as that L- clock is no longer going to happen.
All right, well, there you go. So the second part of that question was was the ask about the built-in holds and how they work. So some rockets, like United Launch Alliance, like to have periods where the countdown comes to a natural stop before major critical events. So there are two built-in holds for Atlas V and Delta IV missions. Same will be true for Vulcan. That there is a hold right before the start of fueling operations so that the team has time to catch up if anything has been running a little bit behind schedule, because hey, when you're trying to do things at 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon in Florida summer, you've got electrical storms and thunderstorms that you've got to worry about, and you can't have teams at the pad. So some companies like ULA like to do built-in holds so that it gives the team time to catch up and resolve issues and still potentially launch at the opening of the window. Some organizations like SpaceX dispense with that and say, look, because we fuel so late in the count anyway, there's no need for built-in holds. So we'll just go for it. And if we miss the window, we miss the window and we'll come back tomorrow. That's the same way Roscosmos operates. And the same way, at least, that the Ariane 5 and Vega rockets operate as well. There are no built-in holds into their countdowns, but there are places in the countdown where you can hold if you have an issue, is sort of the way that works.
And the specific issue is a temperature inside a rocket compartment, according to ULA on Twitter.
A temperature inside of a rocket compartment.
Yes.
What is a rocket compartment?
No indication of where the compartment is, but some sort of compartment on the vehicle.
Okay,
I'm gonna be
so
honest.
like the
If it's any
avionics bays
compartment
or
on the
inners?
vehicle, it's a rocket component, right? Like,
Yep. I do not know exactly where, but another super chat from Aaron, $10. Not much, but all you do is an amazing job, and it's fulfilling to be a part of this new space age. Yes, I agree. And speaking of the new space age, Sunday is going to really be an exciting day with up to 3 SpaceX launches, including the hop. Also, depending on your time zone, maybe a Rocket Lab launch as well if you're on the western portion of the world. So lots of exciting launches coming up. Very busy week. But do you want more questions, Chris and Thomas?
yeah, let's do it.
Somebody's asked, F-18E drivers asking where you are currently watching from.
I can start off. You'll know the specifics more than I am. This is the first time I've been here, but we are on the NASA Causeway, which is actually on the Kennedy Space Center property, directly adjacent to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. For those who are not familiar, Cape Canaveral, the broader Cape Canaveral area here on the east coast of Florida, is actually broken up into two halves, basically. There's the Kennedy Space Center, which is home to facilities such as the shuttle landing facility, the vehicle assembly building, and Launch Complex 39, both pads 39A and 39B. That is all on the NASA-controlled Kennedy Space Center. The other half of Cape Canaveral is the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, which is where Delta IV will lift off from tonight. That hosts all of the other launch pads. So the Pad 41, where Atlas V lifts off, Pad 40, where Falcon 9 missions take off, Pad 37B, which is what you're looking at right now with a Delta IV Heavy. A lot of other launch pads that I couldn't even name all of them. There are dozens of launch pads on this half of the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. There's also the skid strip, another long runway down here at Cape Canaveral, frequently used for Pegasus air launches. Spacecraft arriving via aircraft to meet their launch vehicles often land there on like Air Force transports and things like that. So there's two kind of distinct halves. You can, they're pretty close to one another. They're right next to one another. So we are here standing on NASA property, looking at Air Force property. And as you can see, we're only, Chris, how many miles from the pad are we right now? About 3 miles from the pad. And this is where all of the launch media covering tonight's mission will be viewing the launch from. We've got, like Chris said, 40 cars out here with different news teams and photographers and journalists and all that here to cover tonight's launch. But yeah, we are here just about 3 miles northwest of Pad 37B. Am I right on that?
We are southwest of 37B.
Southwest of 37B at the Kennedy Space Center looking at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
Are we good for so we are good for additional questions here.
Cool. Dougal is asking, are there any other rockets that have a separate T- and L- countdown?
Yes, the Atlas V is the other one from United Launch Alliance that has a separate T- that has built-in holds, which leads to the T- and L- times being different. As for rockets that launch from Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, that is the only other one. The Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavies do not have built-in holds. In terms of U.S. rockets that have built-in holds, Antares for Northrop Grumman has a hold that is built into its countdown as well. But then globally, Russia doesn't use built-in holds. The European Space Agency and Arianespace don't utilize built-in holds, and I don't believe JAXA does, but we don't really get a lot of information on their countdowns in that regard. And I do not believe China does. They have never said that they use built-in holds, but they could. Who knows? They're very, very secretive.
I can think of one other launch system that we actually do know uses built-in holds, but is not an orbital launch system yet. If you've been following Starship testing down in Texas, there have been several times where they have a nice long testing window and they can have built-in holds into that countdown. And as we alluded to earlier, the whole point of a built-in hold is to allow your teams to address potential issues during the countdown without actually delaying the launch itself.
And let me give you a great historical example of how built-in holds saved us one day. February, and where's John Krause? He's gonna laugh at me because it's a shuttle thing. He's not here. John. He's like literally 2 cars down, and he's gone. It was the final flight of Space Shuttle Discovery, STS-133, in February of 2011. The range computer, one of the range computers actually crashed and went down, and they needed to bring it back up. And they were troubleshooting, and they were going through the whole process, and they were already in their hold at T-9 minutes. And so they did the poll, and that was the only constraint, was that range computer. It was the only constraint. So they decided to do something kind of interesting, which was to pick up the countdown at T9, even though they were in technical violation, and count down to the next hold point, which was at T-5 minutes. The thought process being there and the reality being there that if they, by picking up the count, they actually gave the teams 4 extra minutes to solve the problem. Because if you would have continued to hold it, this is where it becomes bizarre. If they would have continued to hold at T-9 minutes, they would have had 5 minutes total, and that's it. They would have blown the launch window. But if they pick up the count for 4 minutes down to T-5 minutes, then you've still got 5 minutes to hold at the T-5 minute mark, but you've given the teams 9 minutes to fix the issue instead of 5. And that mission launched, believe it or not, with 1 second remaining in its launch window. And that is the best description I have as to how built-in holds can save launch days by giving teams a little extra time to work issues. Now, that was amazing on the ground, but yeah.
I'll also point out, because I'm looking at our production preview here, I see Michael has brought up some of the extra camera views. United Launch Alliance is now providing us some camera feeds that we can bring to you. I don't know how long that's been happening because I literally just looked at the production.
That just started.
Okay, cool.
One view you were seeing with a onboard camera on the rocket.
Yeah, so just so you know, as much as we would like to, NASA Spaceflight does not have our own camera strapped to the rocket today, although that would be really cool. No, those are views via United Launch Alliance. We will be showing you not only those views, but the ones from our own camera here at Cape Canaveral. And we will, of course, also be working our best to track the rocket with our own camera as it lifts off. Eventually, it will be out of our view, and when that happens, we will cut to those other camera feeds from United Launch Alliance. Like we said earlier, this is a classified mission, and therefore, ULA will end their live coverage of the launch just after payload fairing Jettison. And as a result of that, we will likely wrap up our live coverage right around then as well. So just so you know what to expect once we have liftoff here. But yeah, should stay tuned. I mean, ULA usually has some great onboard camera views and things like that, stuff that we can't bring you ourselves. So we'll make sure to bring you all of the best views and information surrounding the launch.
Okay, another question. Why does Delta Force set itself on fire, but Shuttle did not? Is it just the nature of the engine? And I will put up a picture of Delta 4 setting itself on fire, because I figured you might get a question about that, so you can see what the question's talking about.
So the reason that Delta Force can sometimes set itself on fire, but Shuttle didn't, when we're talking about hydrogen-oxygen engines and the need for the radial outward firing initiators, or ROFIs, to burn off that hydrogen, it comes down to what is the acceptable amount of ambient hydrogen around the vehicle at engine ignition. When you do not have people on board and you have a system that you kind of built to withstand it, you can get the Delta 4 effect, which is huge fireball at ignition, and sometimes it takes off on fire. When you have people on board and you have the vehicle like the Shuttle, which had a very fragile thermal protection system that had to constantly be protected, you had blankets and tiles in that area. Basically, you didn't want a huge hydrogen fireball happening at shuttle ignition, because if you ended up in an emergency situation, which they did 5 times throughout the course of the program, where after you lit the engines, you had an abort and you had to stop, right? The way that the shuttle crew would have evacuated the shuttle in that event that they needed to was to actually open the side hatch and run out across the crew access arm. And you couldn't have huge quantities of flammable hydrogen in the atmosphere where a single spark could really spell a bad day if you were in an emergency situation. So that's why you get systems using the same type of propellant and oxidizer, same radial outward firing initiator system, but totally different effects is different acceptable limits of ambient hydrogen in the air around your vehicle at engine ignition.
And then a question about, I think they're asking, like, will we get to see live onboard videos, even though it's a national security mission? So will we see a live camera on the rocket?
I believe the answer is yes.
Yes, so we actually cut to one a little bit earlier. ULA was showing a live view of the rocket while it sat on the pad. So yeah, there will be live onboard views. What we won't see is a live view of the payload. If you watch like a commercial mission or a NASA science mission or something like that, oftentimes there will be a camera on top of the second stage looking up at the payload, so you can see the satellite sitting there or whatever the payload may be. That is something you will not see because what's classified is the exact contents of the payload on board. But you should still see some onboard video from the rocket itself, just looking down at the boosters and things like that. You'll probably see a live view of the fairings falling away behind the second stage. And we'll hopefully get some good onboard views of the 2 side cores separating, which is always a great sight to see because they are really just first stages of Delta Force that they strap to the side, so they're nice and big. So those will fall away, and we should get a good view of that, as well as separation of the first and second stages, the center core and the Delta cryogenic second stage. So hopefully, I mean, it depends on what ULA decides to show, but hopefully we will still have some onboard views, just not of the payload.
Yeah, and one thing to talk about here in terms of the flight profile itself for the Delta 4. The Delta 4 is a climber. The Delta 4 Heavy climbs very, very high and has a very shallow initial pitch over for its gravity turn as it begins to head out of the dense lower atmosphere. So the visual effect for us on the ground is that sucker is just climbing, and you're like, okay, tip over now, please, and start getting more horizontal acceleration. But basically so there are 3 engines, one on each of the common booster cores that form the first stage of the Delta 4. They are the RS-68A engines, built by Aerojet Rocketdyne and Northrop Grumman. Aerojet Rocketdyne builds the engine, Northrop Grumman builds the nozzle. In fact, take a look at the Delta Heavy here on the pad right now with us. So all the orange parts that you see are built by ULA. All the white parts that you see are built by Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman builds all the composite structures on the Delta IV Heavy, including the payload fairing, the interstage between the central common booster core and the Delta cryogenic second stage, the nose cones, the interstages on the common booster cores themselves. The intertanks, yes. Thank you. What did I say?
You said interstage, right?
Oh, intertank. Sorry, in the intertank regions between the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks on the common booster cores. So yes, orange is ULA, white is Northrop Grumman. But basically, this vehicle will lift off. All three RS-68A engines will be at 100% rated performance. During liftoff, about 50 seconds into flight, the center common booster core will throttle that engine down to about 55% of maximum to conserve propellant. This is what lets the common booster core, the central common booster core, burn for well over 5 minutes. And well over a minute, and for more than a minute after the side cores deplete their propellant and separate.
And the other part of that, and why they don't just all operate on full thrust and kind of all separate at the same time, is that the engine also has to throttle down a bit to manage max Q. And if you're not familiar with what that is, Q is the symbol for dynamic pressure, and that is basically the combination of the vehicle's speed and the atmosphere's density as the rocket accelerates out of the atmosphere. As the rocket accelerates faster and faster, the drag force as a result of that is higher and higher, is pushing harder against the atmosphere. However, as it climbs, the atmosphere actually becomes less dense, which is reducing the pressure on the vehicle. So initially, the pressure is climbing as the vehicle accelerates, but then at some point, the thinning of the atmosphere becomes more dominant than the acceleration of the vehicle itself, and the pressure starts to go back down. The point where the pressure stops rising and starts decreasing is called max Q, or maximum dynamic pressure. Around that point, in order to make sure that the vehicle stays below the pressure levels that the structure is designed to withstand during flight, that is why they throttle down that center engine. And why they don't throttle down all three engines to handle that is because they want to drop those two side boosters as quickly as possible. The sooner you can burn all of that fuel and eject the two side boosters, the sooner you lose all of the empty weight of those two boosters. So that's why they control their max Q by only throttling down the center core, so they can drop those side boosters faster. And then once that happens, you will hear the United Launch Alliance commentators call out back to maximum thrust or full thrust mode on the center core, because once those boosters separate, that first stage will go back up to 100% power until it depletes the remainder of its fuel. So there you go. There's the full explanation of that part of the flight profile.
And then, of course, after that, when the center common booster core depletes its propellants and separates, you have the extension of the RL-10, the RL-10 nozzle extension that occurs shortly after common booster separation, and then you have ignition on that upper stage engine. That is a very highly efficient from an ISP perspective engine and stage, but it is an extremely low thrust to weight stage. So when that thing actually ignites, its thrust to weight ratio is something like 0.8, and it only climbs to like 1.3 at maximum. It's an incredibly low thrust to weight stage. So basically what those three common booster cores are trying to do to help you visualize this is they're trying to throw the vehicle so high and with a downrange footprint so far downrange in the Atlantic that it actually compensates for the lack of thrust to weight ratio on the second stage. So you will actually see you would if it was not a classified mission, see that during second stage flight, the altitude actually starts to drop because you overshoot the actual orbital altitude you want in these rockets that have very low thrust to weight second stages. And then you actually use Earth's gravity pulling you back down to give you a little bit of an energy efficiency boost in that second stage flight that allows you to get into your planned parking orbit. Whereas the Falcon 9, for example, has a very high thrust to weight second stage. So it is not actually overshooting its altitude target. It's hitting its circularized altitude target at the moment the engine shuts down.
And to put that another way, basically the first 3 cores down on the lower part of the Delta IV Heavy are launching it so high that the upper stage engine, that RL-10 engine, has enough time to accelerate the engine to orbital velocity where it needs to reach. But basically, the higher it goes, the more time before it would re-enter, or not re-enter necessarily, but come so low that it can't reach its target altitude. So that's another way to think of it, especially if you have played Kerbal Space Program, which I'm realizing we allude to far too often on these streams. But yeah,
there's never enough Kerbal Space Program. Yes, because ultimately what you're aiming for in that initial parking orbit of Earth is a velocity of roughly 7.6 kilometers per second, which is low Earth orbit orbital velocity. Roughly, because it does depend on what your apogee and perigee is, but that's a good rough estimate. And I believe for the Delta IV Heavy, when the center common booster core shuts down like 5.5 minutes into flight, you're already at like 5.5 kilometers per second. So and the same is true with the Atlas. The first stages of the Atlases and the Deltas do the lion's share of the velocity change to get you on your way toward orbital velocity, and then the Centaur and the DCSS, the Delta Cryogenic second stage, finish out that process. But because they're high efficiency but low thrust to weight, they don't have to do the lion's share of the work. Whereas like the Falcon 9 drops it off at like 3 kilometers per second, and the second stage has to do the lion's share of the work to get it to orbit.
And there are other rockets that use that low thrust but high efficiency RL-10 engine. We mentioned the Delta IV uses a single RL-10 engine on its second stage. In fact, the same entire second stage is the first upper stage that will be used on the Space Launch System, the SLS rocket. It's called the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, but it is identical to the Delta IV upper stage, and that will have a single RL-10 engine. There's also a single RL-10 engine on the upper stage of the Atlas V rocket, the Centaur upper stage, another high efficiency but low thrust upper stage. And then that will continue on to the Centaur 5 upper stage on ULA's new Vulcan rocket. And that stage will actually have 2 RL-10 engines on board, much like the Starliner configuration of Atlas V, which also takes advantage of RL-10's ability to have 2 on board the Centaur upper stage.
But not the Delta Cryogenic second stage.
Correct.
The
Delta Cryogenic only has one.
And it is worth noting there are 2. Sorry, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You're good.
Yes, that there are well, now there's only one, but there were prior to today, technically 2 Delta Cryogenic upper stages, because there was one 4-meter diameter for the Delta Medium configurations, and then the 5-meter configuration that is used on the Heavies. And only the 5-meter is used on the Heavies, and it is the 5-meter variant that is the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, perhaps permanent cryogenic propulsion stage for the SLS, depending on how funding for the exploration upper stage ends up working out in Congress.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is the first Delta IV Heavy since the retirement flight of the first Delta IV period since the last flight of the Delta IV Medium, correct?
Yes, indeed. There was the Delta flight of the Medium line in August of 19. And this is the next one.
Yeah.
From then, yes.
So for those who may not remember, last year.
I was on mute. You might have to repeat that. Sorry.
No, sorry. Basically, Chris did answer my question and confirm that yes, this is the first Delta
Chris and
IV
Thomas
launch.
are too close together. We're getting echo.
Sorry about that. I'll walk away from them a bit. This is the first Delta IV family launch since the last flight of the Delta IV medium configuration, which basically, if you look at the rocket you're looking at right now, instead of those 2 side boosters that were basically just additional first stages that they've strapped on, there were solid rocket boosters, the smaller solid rocket boosters on the side to help it lift off, carrying some lighter payloads than the heavy configuration carries. That configuration of Delta has been retired, and much like that, the Delta IV Heavy is also nearing its retirement. This is actually the 5th to last flight of the Delta IV family of rockets. 4 more after tonight, assuming tonight launches.
All of them are for the National Reconnaissance Office as well.
Yep, there will after tonight there will be 4 left, 2 to launch from Cape Canaveral here with what we believe are additional Orion satellites for the National Reconnaissance Office, and then plus 2 more Delta IV heavies from Vandenberg in California, carrying additional National Reconnaissance Office payloads. But after that, Delta IV is being retired, and that is part of United Launch Alliance's plan to transition to their new Vulcan rocket, which is lower cost and more powerful than even the Delta IV Heavy rocket you're looking at right now. So we are not quite in the end days of Delta IV, a couple years left, but we are at the point where we can see the end of the tunnel, if you will. This is one of the final flights of Delta IV Heavy. And another reason why I'm especially grateful to be out here, because like I said, this is my first Delta IV Heavy, and I barely caught the last Delta IV Medium, and I'm looking forward to finally seeing a Heavy tonight. Only a couple of these left, Chris.
Yeah, and if the manifest sort of sticks in terms of the mission order, the next after tonight's, the next one will be theoretically later this year. I believe November is the current, no earlier than target for the Delta IV out of Vandenberg with an NRO satellite. And then that will leave 3 on the manifest. And basically at that point, it's 1 a year, 1 in 2022, 1 in 2023. And then the final one from here, Slick 37B in 2024. So if the manifest holds right now, Florida will get the final Delta IV Heavy that will launch.
Yep, and just a couple of super chats. Moldy Space Industries, thank you again, another $10 from Moldy. Oh geez, another hold, time for another caffeine money super chat. Thank you so much, Moldy. And then Space United, are they? I wonder if they are the soccer team.
I was gonna
I
say,
think
are they the Space United?
yeah, there's a Space United Twitter account. They're like a soccer team with a bunch of space companies, including SpaceX. I'm wondering if they are the Space United. But anyways, thank you so much for the $20. Just a little something to support your logistics, and in case you're still using the gas station mic, yes, we're constantly working to upgrade the equipment. This is the first time we have tried having both Thomas and Chris using their phones to connect to Discord for real-time audio, and we'll continue to upgrade that equipment. So thank you for support. And also a couple of questions. Are all the engines on this rocket running liquid hydrogen and LOX?
Yep, both all 3 lower cores, the center core and the 2 strap-on core boosters. All of those are RS-68 engines using liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and then the RL-10 engine on the second stage uses liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen as well. Completely hydrogen fueled, this rocket.
And just to update everyone, if you're just joining us, the countdown is currently in the hold at T minus 4 minutes. There is normally a planned hold at T minus 4 minutes, but that hold has been extended due to a bad temperature reading in a compartment on the rocket. We're not sure which compartment on the rocket, but the planned hold has been extended. But it is a several-hour launch window tonight, so as of now, the launch is still on. Dougal asks, will we get to hear ULA's callouts on their go, no-go checks? Yes, they will be broadcasting to go, no-go pull, so when that happens, you will pipe that audio in. And then we're getting a lot of questions about the flare stack. I know we answered this at the very beginning, but maybe Chris or Thomas, would you just remind us what the flare stack is for some of the new viewers?
Yes, indeed. So unlike the other rockets that launch off of Cape Canaveral that all use kerosene and oxygen, which kerosene does not require a flare stack, the Delta IV Heavy uses liquid hydrogen. And when liquid hydrogen boils off, hydrogen is an extremely flammable and combustible substance. So to keep the vehicle safe, to keep the pad environment safe, as well as that liquid hydrogen rises in temperatures inside the tanks and boils off, they can't just vent it into the air like they can the gaseous oxygen, which is the white vapors that you see around the vehicle. Right now, they have to channel it out and into a flare stack where it can be safely ignited and burned off. So that is the function of the hydrogen flare stack that you see today. Not all of that hydrogen makes it out there. Some of it does collect as it's cycled through the engines and is released into the air. And there is a certain amount, a parts per million count of an acceptable level of hydrogen in the atmosphere for ignition. This is why you see the radial outward firing initiators, or ROFIs, ignite about 15 seconds before liftoff to burn off some of that excess hydrogen that has accumulated down around the base of the vehicle.
Cool. And okay, here's a good question. I've actually prepared a graphic for this question because I imagined that it might come up. So Spain Space asks, why do Delta Heavy delays cause other launches such as Salcom to slip? And I will put a graphic of Salcom's trajectory on the screen right now, and then maybe Chris or Thomas can explain why this is a problem for Delta.
Yes. So that is a fantastic question, and the first thing we do need to make clear is it's not the Delta Heavy that's the problem. It's the satellite on top of it that's the problem. So, for those of you who have been following, this question directly relates to the SpaceX mission that is scheduled to launch tomorrow, Sunday at 1919 Eastern Time, 2319 UTC. And this is the Salcom 1B mission for Argentina, and it is going into a polar orbit. And the only way to get into a polar orbit from Florida is to go south. You can't go north because you would overfly Georgia and the Carolinas, major safety violations in the early stage of flight. But going south, you can actually get up high enough during those critical first few minutes of flight that the risk of damage to land as you overfly Cuba is really, really small. Not zero, but small. But here becomes the problem. Pad 40 is north of Pad 37B. To go south, the Falcon 9 has to come very, very close to a land overflight of 37B. And 37B is 100% inside the keep out area where personnel and people are not allowed on land, because if there is a failure of the rocket close to the ground, that is where all the debris will come down. Basically, the Cape and all of the providers at the Cape have agreed that they'll roll the dice. All the vehicles are safe enough for this. You'll roll the dice, and if you have to go south from the Atlas pad over Pad 40, SpaceX is going to say okay to that. ULA is going to say yes to Falcon 9 launching from Pad 40 going south over 37B. The problem becomes when you have a multi-million or potentially multi-billion-dollar National Reconnaissance Office satellite sitting on top of a rocket you are going to overfly. And that became the no-no. So if you've been following the adventures of, I call it the adventures of Salcom 1B, which was originally supposed to launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, then got brought over here to be the first polar launch from Florida since 1969, and the ESSA-9 weather satellite was the last one in 1969 that went polar from here. This mission was scheduled for March and then had to be delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was then slated for late July, early August, but then they stacked NROL-44 on the Delta in late July, and that immediately precluded any ability to do the southern launch from any of the pads, because 37B is the southernmost of the 4 major operational pads that we have here right now at the Cape. The other 3 being Slick 40, where the Falcon 9s launch from, Slick 41, where the Atlas 5s launch from, and 39A, where the Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies launch from.
And I have a map of that area that Chris is talking about right now. So you can see LC39A at the very top, followed by Slick 41, then Slick 40. There is actually LC48, which is being built right now. That might be something to add to this map soon. But the active ones are 39A, Slick 41, and Slick 40, and Slick 37B. And that in this region, and Slick 40 is where the Falcon 9 is launching from, and Slick 37B is where Delta is currently launching from. So I put back Falcon's trajectory. You can see how when the Falcon 9 heads south, it's going to pass very close to 37.
Right. So that is what ultimately became the issue, was stacking the NROL-44 payload on top of the Delta. There was no when the Delta itself was just at the pad without its payload, there was no problem with that overflight. But it became the payload. So that is going forward, right? What will have to be contended with here is major payloads for national security getting stacked onto rockets that then prevent the overflights needed to get onto that southern polar launch corridor route.
Yeah, and Falcon was also supposed to launch in March, and then COVID happened. So it's possible this was a conflict that they knew about, but they didn't expect it to happen because there was going to be such a big gap between Falcon's original launch date and Delta IV Heavy.
Exactly.
And it's also important to note SpaceX could be launching the Falcon mission tomorrow from Vandenberg. They just didn't realize this is going to be a conflict. So if there are times in the future where they know there could be a conflict ahead of time, they could potentially look at using Vandenberg as another option.
And that actually comes into something that has happened before. If you remember, not too long ago, there was a NASA Mars that NASA sent to the ULA Atlas V rocket. And most interplanetary missions launch here from Cape Canaveral or Kennedy Space Center.
Thomas, you're getting some echo again.
All right, we're good. So like I was saying, the United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket carrying NASA's InSight lander did not launch from Cape Canaveral like most interplanetary missions do. They actually launched from Vandenberg. And the reason they did that was, as Michael alluded to deconflict with a busy range schedule over here on Florida Space Coast. And the reason they were able to do that is because the InSight lander was small enough that Atlas V had the capability to launch it to Mars, despite the performance hit from having to do a maneuver on orbit to correct its orbital plane from launching into a semi-polar orbit initially. So that is an interesting bit where, yes, teams can move launches between the ranges to make sure that they still hit whatever orbit they need to, but also not lend themselves to unnecessary conflicts with other missions launching around the same time.
And for those of you just joining our broadcast, my name is Chris Gebhardt. I'm the Assistant Managing Editor of NASA Spaceflight. I am here with my colleague.
Hi, I am
his phone.
I'm Thomas Burkhardt, one of the newest editors for NASA Spaceflight, also a writer and reporter. And we are both here at the Cape Canaveral. Actually, sorry, I keep getting that wrong. We are technically at Kennedy Space Center, looking at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, here in Cape Canaveral, Florida. We are also joined, not on this live stream right now, but here at Cape Canaveral, Julia Bergeron, photographer for NASA Spaceflight, is also here. And you will also hear the voice of Michael Baylor, who is producing things behind the scenes for us. You'll hear him chiming in as well. So that is the NASA Spaceflight team bringing you this live coverage of the Delta IV Heavy rocket carrying the NROL-44 mission to orbit tonight, hopefully early this morning, I guess now. Right now we are in an extended built-in hold. We are at T-minus 4 minutes in holding. However, the hold was not released when initially scheduled because the teams are currently working through a temperature sensor issue, a temperature reading. And as far as we are concerned, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, that is still in work, correct?
Yes, we have the countdown net has been quiet for the last several minutes. I'm still waiting for the anomaly team to come back with the report to the launch director on what the action or the path forward is going to be. So teams right now are not talking on the main net. They are on a separate channel as they try to figure out what the path forward is here.
And we do have a prolonged launch window tonight. National security missions usually get a roughly 4-hour launch windows to be able to launch, and this one does extend until roughly 6:25 Eastern time here, which would be 10:25 UTC. Now, that's the end of the published window. and the reason we want to make this clear is because they might not have until 6:25 to actually launch. Because the published window for today was 1:50 to 6:25, but obviously 1:50 to 2:11 were not viable launch times because they were targeting top of the window at 2:04, right? Roughly. So you can kind of get a sense that maybe the end of the window isn't the true end of the window. Maybe it's a little earlier, but the point being, it's basically a 4-hour. This could be a 4-hour event, depending on how long it takes them to fix the issue, or get comfortable with what they're seeing to know that they're okay to be able to launch today. But of note, because we were talking a little bit earlier about the launch schedule coming up, almost all of it is dependent on this rocket going tonight in its window. If Delta 4 delays again from the window tonight and scrubs for today, I don't even want to begin to think about what that means for Sunday. Automatically, it means Starlink is out because there is not enough separation time between a Delta launch at 2 a.m. and a Starlink launch at 10 a.m. to reconfigure the range between the two vehicles, and the manual flight termination system that is on the Delta 4 and the automated flight termination system, which is on the Falcons. It 100% means that but SOWCOM becomes the question. Because if Delta delays today and goes to Sunday morning at 2, SOWCOM could still technically stay at 1919 EDT, 2319 UTC, because it would be a 17-hour separation. Now, the Air Force has not wanted to do that yet. They outright said no to that when it has been requested to do that quick of a turnaround between the two of them. They've outright said no, even though it's within the time frame that they could accomplish it by. So everything for the rest of the week here from Florida is dependent on Delta going today. The only launch that we have coming up, well, orbital launch we have coming up this weekend that is not dependent on the Delta is Rocket Lab with Electron. But they are battling their own problems down in Mejia with the weather right now. So we will have to see. Obviously, the Starship test this weekend as well, not reliant on the Delta, but that's a test, not really a launch. So, you know, you get what I'm saying. It's all dependent on this beast going today.
Yes, and an important note, the Starlink backup day is not Monday, it is Tuesday. It's a 40, if they cannot launch Starlink tomorrow, it is a 48-hour delay based on the weather forecast. So if there is to be 2 SpaceX launches within just over 9 hours, it is likely going to have to be tomorrow. So a lot of us, obviously, just for the coolness of that, would like to see that happen. But of course, ULA has the range priority, and if they are not able to launch today, they have every right to take the range tomorrow, given the importance of their payload. But yes, it does. If the 2 launches within about just over 9 hours does have to happen tomorrow. It's not the type of thing where if it doesn't happen tomorrow, it'll just push to Monday. SOWCOM, as of now, is the only other launch that could occur on Monday.
And I'll chime in a bit about what Michael just alluded to as far as range priority goes. For those who may not be familiar, there are basically 3 tiers of mission priorities here on the Eastern Range. The Eastern Range is managed by the 45th Space Wing, which is now part of the United States Space Force. And their job is to coordinate all of the different launches that use all of the different tracking assets and support teams and things like that the Space Force provides here in Cape Canaveral, which means that launches can need a bit of separation between the launches occurring in order for all of those teams and assets to be able to support every launch. And in order to do that, you need to prioritize which missions need to launch before others. So as Michael mentioned, missions such as the one you're looking at right now, the Delta IV with a national security mission, a spy satellite for the National Reconnaissance Office, that is the highest tier of priority here at Cape Canaveral. Those missions get the first dibs on whatever launch slot they need to target. The second tier below that is other government missions that are not military. So things like NASA missions or missions for NOAA, those government science missions that we launch. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned. So, all right, so I'll get to that in a second. The second tier is those government science missions that are not military, but still government missions. They are the second tier. And then there is a third tier, which is all of the other commercial missions. So things like telecommunications, satellites, things like that, commercial launches. Those get last dibs on the launch slots. There aren't always launch conflicts. Usually, you get the first date that you request as long as the range is not busy. But when there are multiple launches that are ready to go around the same time, like there are this weekend, you'll see different missions kind of fighting for their launch slots. And right now, the NRO satellite gets first dibs. What Chris was telling me to mention is that there is a bit of a change. SpaceX's Starlink launches at least were originally thought to just be commercial launches. They were for SpaceX's satellite internet constellation. That's what we thought. But it turns out that because of the US Department of Defense's interest in utilizing that capability for communications for military missions, they have actually given Starlink missions that top upper level military range priority as far as missions go. Now, but I don't know.
So sorry, so
Yeah,
much so that when the U.S. government said, you know what, it's a pandemic, it's COVID-19, we don't need that GPS satellite on April 30th. They said, but we do need the Starlinks. Keep launching. Like, so the Starlinks actually got approval to keep launching during the pandemic when a GPS satellite was still, nah, you got to wait 3 months. So that does show their importance to the U.S. military and to the Department of Defense, and how they're bizarrely military based on their classification, but because they're internal to SpaceX, they will still move around the paying customer missions. Like we've kind of seen the dance between Starlink and Southcom shaping up this weekend as well.
And one scenario that did just occur to me, Thomas, you're kind of cutting out there. But if the Delta IV Heavy cannot launch today for whatever reason, but the teams know very early on it's going to be an extended delay, in that case, we could see Starlink still launch on Sunday because Starlink is not dependent on Delta IV leaving the pad. It's just dependent on Delta IV not needing the range just before Starlink launches.
exactly. The Starlink mission will not do a near overflight of land as it reaches. It will go out eastward over the Atlantic Ocean. And so, yeah, like Michael said, that mission does not rely on the vehicle not being on the pad. It only relies on Delta not using its range priority to launch first. Which brings me back to a question I'm now going to pose to Chris, because like we just said, the Starlink missions are actually at the military level of range priority because of the military's interest in using them as a military asset. What I'm going to ask Chris now is, so is the NRO satellite. They are both military missions. So how do they juggle? I mean, does the military decide which one they want to give range priority?
The basic answer to your question is yes, but the more simpler answer than yes is if it's got NRO in the name, it's got priority, regardless of anything else. The interesting thing is when you get to military is when you get the interesting thing that we see with range conflicts here is what happens when you have a national security mission and an interplanetary mission that suddenly align with one another, and your interplanetary flight has a very short window in which to launch to get off the ground to intercept Venus or Jupiter or Mars or whatever planet it is that you're trying to intercept. Well, those would be the big ones. But those become the interesting ones. Or when NASA suddenly finds themselves with a payload on an Atlas and a Falcon 9 at the same time, those become the interesting ones to watch. But anything with NRO in the name and any mission that is assigned based on the national security space launch contracts from the Space Force would be the ones that get range priority instantly, unless it's a crew mission to the International Space Station. Those sometimes take priority over NRO flights because of the safety and function of the International Space Station.
As we all know, we resumed here from Florida Space Coast with the SpaceX Demo 2 mission, and that will become an increasing factor because as we go towards the end of 2020, we have at least only one Crew Dragon possible for this year left, right? Yeah, because the next one's now January or something. So another Crew Dragon mission launching from Florida Space Coast this year, and that is a type of mission that is given range priority as well. So when I say, there's 3 tiers of classification, it's not just that. You also have to consider a bunch of different factors. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But it's an interesting watch when you see different customers and different launch providers juggling their ever-increasing manifest, and it becomes even more of a problem as the Space Coast becomes busier and busier every year.
Well, and one thing we will be watching for as we head into October is right now we know the next NRO mission out of the Cape after this one tonight is NROL-101. Again, they do not go in order. They do not go in numerical order. But NROL-101, which is launching on an Atlas V rocket, this is the Atlas V that will transition to the Northrop Grumman solid rocket boosters and away from the AJ-60s. Oh my gosh, there's AJ-60s and RS-68A engines on the Delta. That almost fried my brain. But anyway, the Atlas is switching away from the AJ-60s, from its solid rocket boosters. A few AJ-60 flights will still fly next year, but by 2022, the Atlas will be completely transitioned over to the GEM 63s. Now, the reason I bring this up is because right now, that is no earlier than the last day of September. No one's really talking about that, though. And there's a lot of nebulousness about that date, which means it could push into October. It's an NRO flight. Well, what's the third week in October? Crew 1. So you can see, we hope we're not headed for that, but we could be headed for a moment of having to juggle an NRO flight and a crew flight. And again, crew flights tend to get priority, but not always. Yeah. Although this time I think they would, because it is a rather important functionality element of the International Space Station that we're talking about here. And crew launches and cargo launches up to the space station were also included in the waiver for missions that could continue to launch back when the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So, Michael, I'm assuming everything is still quiet on the net and we don't have an update yet.
Well, the Countdown net is absolutely quiet because it is no longer accessible to media. It has completely gone down. So I am trying to get reconnected, but so far, no luck.
Okay, well, there's an interesting. Let's hope that's just a glitch and not a premonition of how tonight's gonna go. But okay, so as we continue to wait here, Michael, do we have any other questions that we can take?
Yes. Will Vulcan use solid fuel?
In part, yes, they will. So Vulcan is being designed to use either 2, 4, or 6 solid rocket motors. They will be, yes. Sorry. They will be the GEM 63 XLs, a slightly larger version of the GEM 63s that will begin flying on the Atlas in either September or October on the NROL 101 mission. That's an Atlas 531. An Atlas 5531 with 3 solid rockets on it. Vulcan will fly with solids or have the option to fly with solids. Unlike Atlas, which can fly with an odd number of solids, Vulcan cannot. This is one of those moments of, oh, we're really going to miss the RD-180 engine and its gimbaling ability and thrust vectoring capability as they switch over to the BE-4 Methalox engines from Blue Origin, which do not have that range to be able to correct the vehicle for asymmetrical thrust. So Vulcan, when it flies with solids, will either be 2, 4, or 6, and Vulcan can also fly in a solid rocket booster less configuration with just the 2 BE-4 engines powering the first stage.
Okay, update. I have gotten back on the Countdown net. It is what happens when you read the wrong email and punch in the wrong access code. But I did get disconnected originally, but then I did not attempt to reconnect with the correct access code, so surprisingly, I did not get connected for doing that. But anyways, I am back connected, and another member of the media has told me that I didn't miss anything, so still holding it T-minus 4 minutes.
So the question really becomes, they're not saying anything, so we're just gonna keep on keeping on. Battery health in the camera is good. We still got 220 minutes of battery life remaining on battery number 1. So I think we're good as we head down. Michael, just a note to you on the production side, I'm going to turn the shotgun mic off to conserve its battery. So if just putting it in the collective brain to remind me or double check that I turn it back on.
Copy that. Sounds good.
Okay.
In the meantime, we can definitely go back and take some questions, Michael, if you've got them.
Yes. Let's see. How long can they hold? Let me check. I have a thing on my phone that calculates this for me. There is currently 4 hours or 3 hours and 40 minutes left in the window.
And they are at T-minus 4 minutes and holding, which means they must release the countdown in the next 3 hours and 36 minutes in order to launch before the end of the window. And that is, of course, again, assuming that the window actually ends at 6:25. It is possible that it ends slightly earlier than that, and that the window encompasses multiple different launch windows across a bunch of different days here for this mission. But still several hours left in the window. And since they are basically perpetually 4 minutes away from liftoff, well, definitely plenty of opportunity to still launch tonight.
Yes, and the reason I stopped talking there, thank you for filling in, Thomas, is that there was a call out on the net. They just loaded in an updated guidance trajectory. So they're continuing to update the software on the rocket due to the hold as the launch trajectory changes.
That is interesting that they called that out. So basically, as the launch window progresses, the route that the rocket has to take to reach its intended orbit slightly changes because the Earth is spun a little bit since then and things like that. So the rocket is now being reprogrammed by ULA teams to say, okay, since we're now launching at this part of the window or later in the window, the rocket needs to make some slight adjustments to its flight path in order to reach its intended orbit. So that is what you hear going on there. I wonder if they've done that, if they actually have an idea when the launch might occur, which could indicate that they are close to resolving that temperature issue. So we'll have to stay tuned and see.
Yes, and there was a question earlier about where in Florida you could see the launch. So I did bring up the launch visibility map from ULA, so I'll put that on the screen. If you are in Florida, you can see a pretty significant portion of Florida will be able to see this launch. You can see on the left-hand side that shows how long after liftoff you will be able to see it, assuming the skies are clear. How clear are the skies out there right now, Thomas and Chris?
We have got some sparse, thin clouds every once in a while, but for the most part, we're looking at a beautiful star field and a very clear sky. So, and I believe that weather is fairly consistent across the east coast of Florida right now. So, yeah, if you're in Florida and you look east after liftoff, very good chance that you would be able to catch a glimpse of the bright and powerful Delta IV rocket tonight.
Looking for more questions. Again, if you have a question in chat, just tag at NASA Spaceflight. Meanwhile, I'll go through some more super chats. Ion Particle, 10 Canadian dollars. Did SpaceX ever get the larger fairing needed to launch the same large payloads as a Delta IV?
That is a great question. Matter of fact, they have earned funding in order to develop that new fairing. So one of the most recent bits of space news was the award of the National Security Space Launch Phase 2 contracts to both United Launch Alliance and SpaceX. And that money is going to go towards the next several years of national security launches aboard the United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket and SpaceX's Falcon family of rockets, the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. And as part of that deal, SpaceX's proposal to serve those national security missions involved in developing a new payload fairing for Falcon Heavy that would be larger than the current standard Falcon fairing that they use. And as again, mostly to serve the larger volume satellites that currently can only be launched on things like Delta IV and Atlas V, which both have some slightly larger payload fairings than SpaceX does. So yes, the recent awards did go to SpaceX and ULA, and as part of that, SpaceX will receive funding to continue development and complete development of that fairing. And they were also already awarded one launch as part of the set of launches that will be awarded under this contract. So it's possible that that launch will need that fairing. We'll hear more about that as we get closer to those launches. Again, they're a couple years off still. But yes, that fairing will be developed and will fly thanks to the recent awards from the Space Force. So, yep.
And one of the things that the award for the NSSL Phase 2 contract also included for SpaceX was the money to build the mobile vertical integration facility at 39A, which will allow them to stack these national security payloads vertically instead of integrating them horizontally. That is something, for some reason, that the U.S. government absolutely detests vertical integration of payloads for some reason, and they mandated vertical integration. And SpaceX, and they awarded SpaceX the money not just for the fairing, but for that structure as well at 39A in the NSSL2 awards, which makes it sort of unfairly look like SpaceX got more money than ULA for these missions. But what it actually was is that the NSSL contracts, and the weird way that it worked this time round with them, is the Space Force refused to give SpaceX funding in the development round, in the Phase 1 development round, but did give funding to all the other three competitors for the contract. So SpaceX literally had no money to go develop this fairing and this vertical integration capability at 39A until they won 40% of the Phase 2 contract, and then got the money to build it anyway. But that's another whole element of that story.
And I'll bring up something interesting that I just thought of, and I'm not sure I'd given much thought to. So we mentioned the larger payload fairing and the mobile servicing tower or mobile vertical integration facility, whatever the official name will be, at 39A. Two big grounds, or one ground system and one flight system that will be developed in order to serve these national security missions over the next several years. And I'm going to pose a question to Chris here, because well, you know, you're the walking encyclopedia of space knowledge.
Oh God, set me up for failure there.
Almost an opinion question. So there are no wrong. So we talked about Falcon Heavy, and that is what we have heard it referred to when we're talking about the new payload fairing and the mobile servicing tower. However, is there any reason that there might not be a smaller, lighter payload, or a payload going to a lower orbit that doesn't need all the power behind the Falcon Heavy, but could still need a large volume payload fairing, or need to be vertically integrated, even though it's not heavy enough to require a Falcon Heavy rocket? So could we see the large fairing on a Falcon 9, or could we see vertical integration at 39A with a Falcon 9?
It's a good question, but I think it's a slightly... I think there's a better way to ask it, which is not, are there smaller payloads that could go on a Falcon 9? Yes, there are. The category A and B missions can certainly go on a Falcon 9. In fact, the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy were both bid in SpaceX's contracts for the NSSL awards, and those will come down to mission by mission considerations. Vertical integration stacking is a good question. I believe that was a mandate of the contract for all of them. But the enlarged payload fairing in a Falcon 9, that's a good question. I have not seen a render from SpaceX that shows the Falcon 9 with it, and I believe, and this is why I say I think it's the wrong way to ask the question, is I think it comes down to aerodynamics. And the aerodynamics of a Falcon 9 do not support the larger payload fairing, but the aerodynamics of the Heavy do. Because we have not seen any render from SpaceX or any talk of the larger fairing being for the Falcon 9. So it's a good question, but I think that to answer it, it's not a matter of are there things that can fit in the regular Falcon 9 fairing. We know there are because they've won NROL contracts before. NROL 71 or 77 that launched right before Hurricane Irma struck. Yeah, or no, not right before Hurricane Irma struck. That was like May of 2017 or something like that. But they've launched NROL missions with horizontal integration before. So it'll just ultimately come down to what's the payload? Can it be horizontally integrated? Yes, no. Does it need a heavy or a Falcon 9? Yes, no. Does it need a bigger payload variant? Yes, no. That's my answer to that.
Okay, a couple more super chats. Bill Sparks, $20. Really appreciate the support. Bill says, keep up the great work. Grim says, this is not a bad way to spend my Friday night. Rocket and beer. Yeah, hopefully we're going to see a launch, though. Still a bit unclear, and we haven't heard a lot of the news on the countdown yet, but hoping for a launch sometime this evening. And then Bent Straight, $10. This one is for you, Nightbot. Get a cold one. Yes, Nightbot doing a good job this evening to keep the early morning if you're on the East Coast like Chris and Thomas are. Nightbot doing a lot of work right now in the chat, so we appreciate that. Jala, $10 Australian. Thank you for tuning in again. You're a big supporter. I recognize your name. And then vaguely, does the Starship change the launch game over Falcon Heavy and Delta 4 Heavy?
You broke up there a little bit, Michael. Can you repeat the question?
They're wondering how Starship will affect the launch market for Falcon Heavy and Delta 4 Heavy.
Gotcha. So, in terms of Starship's effect on the Delta 4 Heavy, absolutely none. The Delta 4 is already being phased out. It has, including this one, 5 more missions to its name. And the final flight of the Delta 4 Heavy is currently slated to occur in 2024 from the pad you are looking at right now here, Slick 37B, at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So Starship will not have an effect on the Delta 4 Heavy. SpaceX has been very clear, however, that they do intend purposefully for Starship to make Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy obsolete. And that their idea and their long-range plan is to transition basically everything over to Starship and with its super heavy booster for orbital flights and everything like that. So that is its effect on SpaceX's current fleet of rockets.
Cool. And just if you're tuning in, the countdown is holding at T-minus 4 minutes still while they work an issue with a temperature reading in a compartment on the rocket. We don't know which compartment, but still waiting for the teams to decide on the path forward. Meanwhile, a question about what we expect to see tonight. Will you be able to see the boosters jettison? Because it's going to be presumably heading downrange a bit by then.
So yeah, that's a really good question. On the Delta 4 Heavy, it's very, very hard to see side core separation. What we expect to see here on the ground is the light emanating from them. The light will get dimmer, very, very noticeably dimmer, which will be our visual cue on the ground that the side cores have shut down. But after that, there are no pyrotechnics that separate them away. Or anything like that. There are no booster separation motors that fire or anything like that. So they just kind of tumble away from the side. And I'm really thinking back to the Parker Solar Probe launch, and I don't personally remember seeing, because that one was at 3:30 in the morning as well, and I don't honestly remember seeing them separating or flipping. From that. So I don't believe we actually get to see that from the ground, because remember, they separate about 4.5 minutes into flight. So the rocket is very, very far downrange from us at that point as well. So distance, altitude will also play a role, as will some of the high altitude clouds that are here tonight for us. But that's in basic terms, it's kind of all we can really expect from booster separation, is just the light will dim, and that's our cue.
Yep.
Of course, if ULA is still broadcasting live views from the cameras on the rocket, then you should be able to see it just fine.
Yep. And again, if they do have those views, we have the ULA cameras too. So we'll bring all of that to you live. We had a good question from Harry about the launch pad itself. What do we know what the future is after the Delta IV Heavy retires?
We do, in a way. The future of the pad is that ULA will hand it back to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and it will be available for anyone to come and lease and tear down the Delta IV structures and rebuild the pad for how they want it. But ULA will not use it after the Delta IV is retired, and they will not use it even as a backup for Vulcan. They would instead look at devoting resources to Slick 41 to be able to increase the throughput of Vulcan missions that they can handle from Slick 41 and Slick 3E out at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And that information actually comes from an interview that I did a week ago with the VP of Major Development for ULA.
So there you go on that. Again, if you have a question, just tag us in chat at NASA Spaceflight. 1 second. Okay, we're about to hear the outbreak. Stand by. I will report as the information comes out. Okay, so it sounds like they have recommended to proceed. They did a lot of thorough analysis into the issue, and based on the rocket's trajectory, it's going to be flying into sunlight, which will help with the temperature issue. So they are going to proceed with the countdown. We are now standing by for them to announce a new targeted T0.
So if you are just joining us, we just got a report from the Countdown Net that ULA engineers, due to a fortunate turn of events where wherever the temperature reading that was slightly off nominal that we detected prior to launch, wherever that reading is coming from, that part of the rocket will be in sunlight once it launches, and as therefore they're not actually worried about the temperature. So it sounds like we will be getting a liftoff time soon.
And see, this is exactly what I love about some of the ways issues are resolved with rockets, right? Is, if we were a bit earlier in the day, that might have been a problem because you're not flying into sunlight, you're flying into darkness. But because Delta IV will get out into into orbital sunrise during its launch campaign, always fascinating how little things can be resolved by, like, oh, maybe we don't need that heater because the sun will heat it for us.
Stand by. U728 UTC is our new T0. That is U728 UTC.
So that's 3:27 Eastern. Okay, 3:27 Eastern. Awesome.
Just to check was that 27 or 28?
28.
That's what I thought. 328 local, 728 UTC, new T0. So that means we are just about, doing math in my head, 25 minutes. Oh, and then Michael brought up the countdown timer.
Oh, you nailed the math though. That was dead on.
25 minutes from the new scheduled liftoff time of the Delta IV Heavy rocket with the NROL-44 mission for the National Reconnaissance Office here from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Let's light this candle.
and that new T0 has now been confirmed with range. Okay, and they have now coordinated that new T0 with all relevant authorities, and the rocket has now been programmed for that new time. I can take a couple more questions while we wait. Why are the NROL mission numbers, or how are the NROL mission numbers assigned? They don't seem to be in any logical order.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit, but I'm pretty sure you're asking, like, is there a reasoning behind the numbering for all the NRO missions?
Yes, and why did they not launch in order?
Okay. From my understanding, and I could be mistaken because again, this is all classified. Number one rule of NRO Club: don't talk about NRO Club. But I believe the numbering comes from when the missions are designed and authorized. So when the mission is designed and the NRO says, "Hey, we want to complete this mission." Once it gets far enough in its development process that it's decided, yes, we will launch it. That is when it gets its NROL designation number. So basically, if you look at the mission, this one NROL-44, and then whatever the NROL-45 mission is, this mission was designed and authorized for launch prior to the 45th one. Now, if the 45th one will take only 2 years to get ready for launch, versus this one maybe took 5 or 6 years or something, the NROL 45 will launch before NROL 44. This is again, I'm just making up numbers there, but the point being that I believe the numbers come from the order in which they are designed and conceived of by the NRO, not the order in which they are actually launched.
And again, if you have a question, just ask us in chat by tagging at NASA Spaceflight. A couple of super chats. Ben, thank you again. Another $10. Chris, this is why we love NSF's dedication. Thank you for that. And then James Alkins, thank you for the membership. And Harry Young, thank you for tuning in again, Harry. Harry says, Thomas, you've been watching too many ULA commentaries. Your pronunciation is spot on compared to the PAO's liftoff call.
I will take that as a compliment. Thank you, sir.
And then a question about the status of Omega.
What is the question about the status of Omega?
Is it officially canceled? I think is what you're getting at.
We have heard nothing officially from Northrop Grumman about the status of Omega. Obviously, its future is a bit precarious right now, but nothing official. No.
And for those who don't know, that is in response to the recent Phase 2 awards, which did not include Northrop Grumman's Omega rocket. Many have speculated that without Phase 2 award, that the Omega rocket might not have enough customers to support that program. But Chris said Northrop Grumman has not said anything about the fate of the Omega program since that award. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that one.
No, but you want to talk about fate for a second, Thomas?
Okay.
We believe, right, and of course we don't know for certain, but we believe it's an Orion vehicle on that Delta IV, right? Yeah. What constellation just rose above? The Orion constellation literally just rose over the launch site here with a potential Orion vehicle on the Delta IV. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good.
Also, I gotta say, looking at Orion, pretty grateful Betelgeuse is still there. And it looks good. Anyway, questions about the mission as we geek out in constellations here at 3:08 a.m.
We're doing pretty well as we get through the queue. Again, if you have questions, keep tagging us. We need time to kill for the next 20 minutes.
You know what? Let's talk about the flight profile then, and let's remind some people of things that we talked about a couple of hours ago, right when we went live. Yes. So what we are headed for, right, roughly L-7. We will have the go no go poll, where the launch teams will poll everyone and verify that all systems on the rocket, on the ground, on the spacecraft, inside that may or may not be looking at us as we speak. Little NRO joke there. Hopefully that plays at 3 a.m. Worked great in my brain. I hope it translated well. But we will have that go no go poll. If everything is correct at 3:24, we will release the hold at T-minus 4 minutes and count down. That is Delta's terminal count sequence. At T-minus 15 seconds, the radial outward firing initiators at the base of the pad, these are sparks, they're called ROFIs, will ignite to burn off excess hydrogen that has collected around the base of the rocket as propellants are flowed into the engines to cryogenically cool them down and prepare them for liftoff. At T-minus 6 seconds prior to liftoff, the ignition sequence of the 3 RS-68A engines will begin. This will produce a fireball, a huge fireball that will rush up the length of the Delta IV Heavy. It is not uncommon for that fireball at times to result in some of the orange thermal protection system foam on the 3 common booster cores to ignite as well. So it is not uncommon for the Delta IV Heavy to take off on fire. This is normal. We lovingly call it the most metal of rockets because it sets itself on fire when it lifts off. But this is normal. It's very dramatic looking. It's very nice, but it's perfectly normal and safe. After that, Delta IV will lift off the pad. If all the health checks are correct at T0, the hold downs will release and Delta IV will lift off. Delta IV is not a quick lever. It will not ghost you. It will stay around. Delta IV's thrust to weight ratio at liftoff is very, very low, so it does appear to sort of lumber off the launch pad a little bit. It will climb very steeply and vertically, with all 3 RS-68A engines firing at 100% of rated performance. 50 seconds into flight, the center common booster core will throttle down to 55% to mostly maintain or conserve fuel, but it also helps to lower the aerodynamic stress on the vehicle as it passes through max Q, or the maximum area, or the area of maximum dynamic pressure. The center core will continue on in that 55% throttle down mode for the majority of first stage flight. The 2 side cores will burn out and separate about 4.5 minutes into flight. The center core will then throttle back up to 100% shortly thereafter and fire for roughly another minute before it shuts down and separates, leaving the Delta cryogenic second stage, or the upper stage, to do the remaining part of the job to get the vehicle to orbit. Shortly after ignition of the RL-10B engine on the second stage of the Delta IV rocket, we will have basically the end of launch coverage, based on the fact that this is a classified satellite, and at the request of the NRO, basically once the RL-10B engine ignites, the live coverage will end from United Launch Alliance, but shortly thereafter, the payload fairing will separate. This is not 2 payload fairing halves, but rather 3. So that the fairing splits into 3 at separation. And then the Delta cryogenic second stage will initially take what we believe to be the Orion Signet satellite into a low Earth parking orbit. It'll coast for a few minutes, reignite its engine to perform the geostationary transfer orbit injection burn. At which point the whole stack, it won't release the payload, the whole stack will coast the 6.5 or so hours up to 35,786 kilometers, which is geostationary orbit, at which point the RL-10 engine will reignite to circularize the orbit of the Orion, of what we believe to be the Orion Signet payload, into geostationary orbit. So this is what we refer to as a direct to geo insertion orbit, where the rocket will actually take the satellite the entire way to geostationary orbit. The satellite will not have to do any of that long haul maneuvering on its own, just fine tuning adjustments after it pops off the top of the Delta cryogenic second stage. After payload separation occurs, though, in geostationary orbit, the Delta second stage will not do a deorbit burn. Instead, it will fire its thrusters and its engines a little bit more to raise it up about 300 kilometers higher than geostationary orbit, so roughly 36,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, into what is known as the geograveyard. This is the geostationary orbit graveyard, where we put second stages of rockets or satellites or geostationary telecommunications or military satellites that have ended their service. We push them up into the geograveyard, which is a very stable orbit that will not decay for thousands of years, keeps everything safe and keeps that environment nice and roomy. And that's where the Delta cryogenic second stage will be until the heat death of the, until the sun explodes in 4 billion years. But that's the overall flight profile that we are anticipating today, which means we do not expect to get confirmation from ULA or the NRO of mission success until many hours after liftoff, about seven to complete the burn and get itself out of and separate the payload, probably.
It depends on the exact mass of the payload and all that stuff, but it's a few hours after liftoff. Basically, once this launches, you can go to bed. When you wake up in the morning, you'll probably have confirmation that they finished the mission.
Indeed, and what we'll be looking for there is either the tweet from United Launch Alliance confirming the successful mission, and or the 3-digit number tweet from Tori Bruno, which indicates mission success. And what will this be? 140 something?
You put me on the spot, and I have absolutely
you
no
put me
idea.
on the spot a lot today.
Yeah, it's 100 and something, successful missions for
141.
ULA, but
141. There
141. There you go.
So that is the number we look for. So either a tweet from ULA confirming mission success, and or a tweet from Tori saying 141. And if Tori tweets 141, that means mission success.
And or the National Reconnaissance Office is sometimes also the first to tweet out mission success. So another potential source of that first confirmation, but they will all offer their confirmation of a successful mission should that occur. So
we are roughly.
And we are at just under L minus 12 minutes right now. The poll will come at L minus 7 minutes. So when that poll starts to happen, we will plug in that audio. Just for a heads up to Chris and Thomas, you will not hear that poll unless you temporarily unmute the production account. Otherwise, I will just let you know when it's over.
Michael, do me a favor, and when they say they're about to enter the poll, let me know because I wouldn't want to hear that. So I'll
Okay, cool.
when that happens.
Sounds good.
That sounds good. And apologies there for the audio, Michael. I thought I had hit unmute, but it didn't take on my phone there.
Nope, you're good. A couple more super chats. Frieza, thank you for the new membership. Rob Young, thank you for the super chat. Mars Mountain, also turning 50 today. Happy to celebrate with you guys. Well, happy birthday, Mars Mountain. And Keith Ord with a new membership. Thank you as well. We really appreciate the support from everyone this evening. Been a pretty long countdown so far, but just under 11 minutes now, hopefully, if all goes well, away from liftoff of Delta IV Heavy with NROL-44.
Yeah. And we can say with a great degree of confidence that the 80% chance of acceptable weather has indeed occurred, considering there's not a cloud in the sky and the winds are very, very light. And as we said, we think it's an Orion satellite, it's Cygnet satellite on board, and the constellation Orion has just risen to the east. So if that is indeed the payload on board,
yes,
a nice constellation alignment for liftoff today.
It did actually just upgrade the weather forecast. It is now at 90% go.
So they updated the weather to 90% go. Let's just talk about this for a second, because they will never say 100% go, because there was one time in the 90s where they said 100% chance of acceptable weather. Giant thunderstorm over the launch pad as we were trying to launch. So they'll never say 100% ever again. but yeah, Michael, do we have any other? I mean, people have been asking really good questions today, but we do understand the lateness of the hour here in the United States, or the earliness of the hour in Europe if you are watching from there. But come on, I know we've got people watching from Australia and places where it's the middle of the day. We got to have some questions here.
Okay, and let's actually listen into the countdown for a second here, Chris. They are going through their final checkouts. So I'm going to start plugging that in. And 1 second. Sorry, I screwed that up. I am on the wrong thing. Oh, okay. Minor technical difficulty. I apologize. Our behind the scenes thing has briefly freaked out, but I'm in the process of fixing that. The final poll is about to happen, but it's not happening yet. Okay. Yeah, Chris, go ahead for a second, please.
All right, we can certainly do that. So again, tonight we are headed right now for a launch roughly 8.5 minutes from now. We are anticipating the go no go poll here in about a minute. That if all is acceptable, we would release the hold at T-minus 4 minutes for a launch at 3:28 Eastern Time, 7:28 UTC. Of note, this is a very important mission. Not just for United Launch Alliance and the National Reconnaissance Office. It is also the mission that needs to get up and out of here before the double header of Sunday with SpaceX can occur. And specifically, this Delta IV has to get out of here with the NROL-44 classified payload because of the land overflight requirements of the Falcon 9 going south on SOUCOM. So very important mission for ULA and NRO, but also for the remaining launch manifest for the rest of the weekend. Boy, there's a statement you wouldn't hear a couple years ago.
Here comes the poll. I'm turning on the
In a few moments, Launch Conductor Scott Barney will poll the launch team for the final go to pick up the count. 27 engineers and managers are polled for system status and readiness to proceed. This is the final status check before launch for all Delta vehicle systems, ground systems, the spacecraft, and the U.S. Air Force Eastern Range. The vehicle system readiness poll includes electrical systems, hydraulics, pneumatics, propulsion systems, flight control, and propellants. Let's listen in as Scott Barney performs the final polling of the launch team.
Minus 7 minutes. Status check to proceed with terminal count. First stage systems, propulsion. Go. Hydraulics.
Go.
Locks.
Go.
LH2.
Go.
Second stage systems, locks.
Go.
LH2.
Go.
Electrical systems, airborne.
Go.
Ground.
Go.
Facility.
Go.
RFFTS.
Go.
Flight control.
Go.
COM.
Go.
GCQ.
Go.
Operation support.
Go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
Umbilicals.
Go.
HASGAS.
Go.
ECS.
Go.
Red line monitor.
Go.
Quality.
Go.
Op safety manager.
Go.
ULA safety officer.
Go.
Vehicle system engineer.
Go.
Anomaly chief.
Go.
Range coordinator.
Clear to proceed.
Launch director.
Launch vehicles ready to launch.
Mission director.
You have permission to launch.
Proceeding with the count.
Minus.
MEQ, establish swing arm lock pins pull.
Active.
Okay, so there we have it. Everything is good, and we are at L minus 5 minutes until launch.
All right, so there's still a lot of critical things that need to happen in the terminal count in that final 4 minutes, including the pressurization of all of the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen fuel tanks and oxidizer tanks for flight today. So lots of critical events still to come in that final 4 minutes. But again, weather is good. We have no technical issues that are being worked, and nothing right now that would prevent a liftoff of the Delta IV Heavy at 3:28 Eastern Time, 7:28 UTC on Saturday, 29th of August. So let's see if we can get mission one of 6 off the ground. For this
There's
weekend,
been a
Thomas.
set of like, let's see, because it was this. There are 2 Falcon 9s. There was Electron's return to flight in the mix. There was an Astra first orbital launch attempt in the mix. I'm sorry?
Astra has moved.
Yeah, I know there was, and now that's moved a bit. And there was a Ariane Space Vega return to flight mission, all in the next several days.
That's right, because Vega is September 1st Eastern time here in the U.S. September 2nd UTC. I believe it's 1:51 UTC on
Something like
the
that, yeah.
2nd of September, but it's 21:51 EDT.
Yes.
On the 1st. But yes, Vega's returned to flight after a 3-month-long weather delay. But yes, lots, very busy here in the next week, and then a very weird lull that I'm sure SpaceX will fill with some Starlinks for us. But anyway, we should definitely be.
Yep, we are at T minus 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So Chris, can you
Copy
please
that.
turn
Then,
on
Michael,
the
I'm going to
shotgun
leave.
microphone?
Okay, that's what I was just going to say. I'm going to mute my phone, and we'll go to shotgun audio from here.
You actually do not have to mute your phone unless you need to. I can just mute that on the server.
Oh, then let's do it that way. Yes.
And then that way you don't have
need
to.
to
That
remember.
way you don't have to. Exactly. With
Awesome.
that, I will stop talking for now, and I will turn it over to Chris and Thomas for the final countdown. If something happens, I will start yelling, and they will hear me. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. But take it away, Chris and Thomas. Actually, can you give me a few seconds before you start talking? I'm going to do an audio swap. So just wait 5 seconds from now. 5 seconds and start talking.
All right, I have counted to 5 Mississippi in my head, so that's going to be my cue from Michael to start talking. So as we are here to the business end of the terminal count, weather looks pristine at Cape Canaveral today, and all systems are tracking for
Oh, Thomas, you got to talk into the mic now. Sorry.
I'm talking into the wrong microphone, everybody. But yes, we're now under 2 minutes to liftoff, and all systems remain go for launch.
So at this point, the propellant tanks are pressurizing for flight and liftoff. This provides the rigidity of the structure to channel all of that thrust as the vehicle lights its engines and begins to ascend through the atmosphere.
And what we will see during the beginning of the liftoff, what you will first see is ROFI ignition, the sparklers at the base of the rocket, which will begin to burn off excess hydrogen in the atmosphere around the base of the rocket. And then you will see that classic Delta IV heavy fireball around the rocket as those 3 engines at the bottom of the rocket ignite.
1 minute.
In just 1 minute from now. And again, that is completely normal and expected, but it will be dramatic and it will look cool. And then once that happens, you will see Delta IV slowly but surely lift off for launch.
Just so you're not in my way for tracking.
We're just now 40 seconds away from liftoff of the Delta IV Heavy. T-minus 30 seconds and counting. 20 seconds.
ROFI engine ignition. There's our fireball, and we have an abort. No, wait. We have an abort. Delta IV IV Heavy lit its engines and aborted on the launch pad. Folks, there is our hydrogen flare stack. We are not going anywhere tonight. We can say that pretty safely right now. Let's wait and hear what the issue was. Michael, if you can relay that to us. I am switched back to Discord audio.
As am I.
So I should have you back on Discord now.
100%.
I am going to be clear, everyone, this is a scrub for today. They cannot launch again after those engines ignite. So I'm working to figure out what went wrong, but this is actually the second consecutive Delta IV Heavy launch to have an abort at engine ignition. NROL-41, which launched out of Vandenberg, also had this problem. And it is usually, at least at minimum, it will be several days until they can turn around from this, because they have to go back to the rocket and repair some of the singeing that occurs. So, and the rofies are actually the main thing. If the rofies ignite, the rofies have to be replaced. So, at minimum, a several-day delay coming, and that is obviously going to have bad effects for SpaceX's Falcon launch as well, which cannot launch until this one goes.
Yeah, so the immediate implications of this abort are going to be that the SAOCOM 1B mission will be grounded for the near future, and that is due, again, like Michael said, that launch cannot take place while the NRO payload is sitting at Pad 37B due to a near-ground overflight rule. This does not preclude the launch of the Starlink mission, currently scheduled for Sunday morning. Again, we believe that the turnaround requirement for an abort at engine ignition for a Delta rocket will be several days. They will not be ready for an attempt as soon as Sunday, which means that the Falcon 9 Starlink mission from Pad 39A should still be able to continue on Sunday morning. That will be able to take place, but the SAOCOM 1B mission will not. And that mission will have to remain on the ground until Delta IV Heavy launches. So that's the immediate implications. We're going to have to wait and hear more details about the issue itself, that whatever Delta IV Heavy's computers detected at liftoff that prevented the rocket from actually lifting off, as well as whatever delay is associated with resolving that issue.
And I know we mentioned very quickly, this is the second Delta IV Heavy in a row that has experienced engine ignition and shut down on the launch pad. The previous Delta IV that launched a Heavy that launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in January of 2019 encountered a very, very eerily similar, from a timeline perspective, abort. You know, you could tell almost instantly when that fireball started, Thomas. You could tell almost instantly something wasn't right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what it is, but yeah, absolutely no way to launch tonight. The rofies have to be replaced at the very minimum, and the fix to the issue. I know I'm just repeating what's been said for those of you who are joining, that we have had an abort of the Delta IV Heavies launch after engine ignition had occurred. So this will be a several-day delay to Delta IV Heavy. The most immediate impact also meaning that SAOCOM 1B will not be launching tomorrow at all, due to the overflight restrictions and requirements. So we will stand by for a little bit here to see what ULA says as they're working the issue. Michael, have they said anything in particular over the nets at this point?
The auto sequencer called an automated abort. That's all they said. They are now working to save the rocket. So we don't know the exact issue that caused the abort, but it was an automated abort. And I should actually mention, because this is going to be a long delay, Starlink could still launch tomorrow potentially.
Starlink 100%. The Delta IV does not have any connection to Starlink. Starlink is going northeast out of the Kennedy Space Center and 39A. So yes, just because we know this means SAOCOM 1B cannot launch tomorrow, does not mean that that Starlink cannot launch tomorrow morning as well. There's nothing that would prohibit that from a technical and range perspective. And obviously ULA will need time to detank the vehicle, safe it, get back out there, get the mobile servicing tower back over the vehicle, replace the rofies, figure out what happened, and make any fixes that are that are needed to the Delta IV Heavy before it can make its next attempt to launch NROL-44. But of note, that now makes 2 post-engine start pad aborts here at Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center this year. Starlink suffered a post-engine start abort earlier this year, I believe back in March. And now the Delta IV has suffered a post-engine start pad abort as well. This is why we say in the launch business that just because the engine's light, don't mean you're going anywhere. So yeah. Well, Thomas, congratulations! Like you have now, you are now really experiencing what it is like to be one of the regulars down here at the Cape, and especially it's always stings when it's the middle of the night and this happens, but yay for sleep shifting continuing indefinitely now for this mission.
If it's
But why don't you take it away, your experience, and stuff, and let me work an equipment thing over here
Sure.
real quick.
Well, I heard some RS-68s for like 2 seconds, but yeah, no liftoff tonight, and sometimes it happens, but again, those computers didn't like what they saw right when the engine's lit, and that's why there's that couple seconds between engine ignition and actual liftoff, so that when those engines start running, if for any reason something has not gone right in those last couple seconds, they will cancel the liftoff and the rocket can stay on the ground and allow teams to troubleshoot whatever the issue is. Like we always say, it is always better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So ULA teams will take the time, make sure that they correct the issue completely, repair any damage, or replace anything needed at the pad. Like Michael mentioned, the rofies are one ticket item we know need to be replaced after this attempt, which will take a couple days at the least. So we're gonna have to stay tuned about the delay, but stay tuned because we still should have a fairly busy weekend in the spaceflight industry. We should still have a Falcon 9 launch with a Starlink mission on Sunday morning from Launch Complex 39A. We will not have the SAOCOM 1B mission now that Delta IV is still sitting on its pad with its national security payload on board. But other things we could have this weekend, we could have a Starship SN6 hop test in Boca Chica, Texas, no earlier than Sunday. So keep an eye out for that, as well as Rocket Lab Electron's return to flight mission from New Zealand, and that is late Sunday night. Here in the United States, at least, Monday UTC. And then a couple days after that, September 1st, is also Arianespace Vega's return to flight mission coming up. So several spaceflight things to keep you keep tuning into, and we hope you will. But Delta IV is going to remain at Pad 37B for a few days, get checked out, and you will have to stay tuned to ULA to see when that might, when Delta might have another chance to launch. And of course, what this means too,
Okay,
and just to reiterate,
interruption. A scrub has been confirmed. They are proceeding to detanking operations like we had expected, and all they said is that the abort was called at T-3 seconds.
Okay, well there you go. The abort was called at T-3 seconds, which means all 3 of the RS-68As had ignited at that point, which is visually what it looked like before the visual characteristics sort of gave it away that there was a problem and an abort. But of course, what this also means, not just for the NROL-44 payload and an indefinite delay at this point until ULA can figure out what went wrong and how long it will take to fix the issue, is that means SAOCOM 1B is not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. Either Starlink is still possible on Sunday, but definitely not SAOCOM at this point. And SAOCOM, unless they have to destack the NROL-44 payload, which there's no reason to believe they would have to do for a post-abort scenario like this, it just sadly means that the knock-on effect is going to be pretty significant here at the Cape for the immediate launch time, or for the immediate launch schedule here. But that's what we know at this point, with a scrub confirmed for tonight. We are going to go ahead and start breaking down here as everyone else is so that we can convoy out. I do personally want to thank all of you who joined us this early morning or whatever time zone it was around the world. It's always easy to get disappointed when things like this happen, but as Thomas said, and as the old adage goes here, you would much rather be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air desperately wishing you were back on the ground. ULA will figure out what happened, and we'll come back, and when they're ready to go again, we will be here to go again. And whatever the next launch is, we are assuming it will be Starlink Sunday morning at 10:12 a.m. 14:12 UTC. We will be here to bring that to you, as well as all Boca Chica testing this weekend as well. Unfortunately, the polar launch will have to wait for another day again. But Thomas, thank you so much for being out here. And we'll try it again to get you to see your first Delta IV Heavy.
I will make sure it happens eventually. I'm not going to run away because I want to see this thing go. But thank you, Chris, for joining me tonight. Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor for NASA Space Flight. My name is Thomas Burkhardt, an editor and writer for NASA Space Flight. We were also joined by Julia Bergeron earlier in the webcast here as a photographer for NASA Space Flight. And then also on the back end, we had writer Michael Baylor doing the production behind the scenes. I also want to give a big thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight, as well as everyone who gave us memberships and super chats. All of that, all of those resources go towards improving all of our live coverage here at Cape Canaveral, Boca Chica, Texas, Vandenberg, all of the live events we broadcast to you all. All those resources go right into making those better and better. So we appreciate all of that. It allows us to do what we like to do out here. So thank you so much. We hope that you will tune in whenever Delta IV Heavy is ready to try again. We also hope that you will keep tuning in this weekend for other spaceflight events around the world. But for now, we are going to begin to sign off here and allow ULA to get to work on evaluating tonight's abort.
Indeed. And as a final sign off from me, for wherever you are around the world, please continue to be safe, not just in this global pandemic, but with whatever else you are doing, with whatever, car went by, with whatever else you are doing, with whatever else you feel compelled to do and to voice your opinion on. We wish you all the utmost of safety, and to everyone in Louisiana and eastern Texas on the shoreline who are still picking up the pieces and trying to just begin to recover from the devastating direct hit of Hurricane Laura earlier this week on the United States. Our thoughts are with all of you, and we wish you a very safe and speedy recovery from that area as well. So until the next launch, which we believe is Starlink on, next launch that we will be here live for is Starlink. I believe the next one is...
No, Starlink's next.
No, Starlink's next. Oh, days and times. Yes, Starlink is next at 10:12 on Sunday morning. And that should be followed later in the day at 11:05 p.m. on Sunday by Rocket Lab and Electron on its return to flight. So we will be here covering those, as well as the Starship hops and everything like that. Until next time, everyone, thank you so much. Stay safe. We're signing off from Cape Canaveral.
Pressure looks good.
Rolling up. Right away with Lennox. Water towers fly! Flight outside feet off. Feet off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.